I don't get it.
Good evening. My goodness, this is the fullest room I've seen in 4 years. Good evening. Thank you for being with your city council tonight. Welcome to the September 9th meeting. At this time, we're going to rise for invocation. If you so desire, you're certainly invited to join us. And following, I'll ask our Chief Barranco, to come up and lead us in our pledge. Let us pray. Most gracious Father, we thank you for this opportunity to gather. We thank you for the freedoms that too many times maybe we take advantage and take for granted. We pray that your blessings would be upon this meeting, that everything that would be said and done would be done with the spirit of making our community and our city a better place. Father, we want to take this time to thank you for sparing our state damage from Hurricane Dorian, but Father, we want to remember those from the Bahamas and other areas who have been impacted in a negative way by this. We pray that you would be with them, protect them, and help them as they move forward to a better place than they certainly are. We just ask that everything that would be said and done would be with the spirit of making our city better, and that your blessings would be upon all we do. In your name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Chief, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to read over the guidelines for the Aiken City Council meetings. Meetings are public forums in which many opinions are expressed, and the business of the city must be conducted. As such, discipline, honorable, and professional decorum is paramount. Courteous and respectful communication is certainly expected. During public hearings, all questions and statements of the public shall be directed to the chair. If you wish to speak, raise your hand and I will certainly recognize you. Please approach the podium and state your name and address. In order to allow an opportunity for everyone who wishes to address council, speakers should limit their comments to the subject being discussed. Each speaker will be given 5 minutes to address an issue and may only address an issue once unless questions from the council are posed to that speaker. I know we have a lot of emotions and a lot of good ideas and comments that are probably to be shared tonight. So we want to make sure we do it in an orderly way, in a way that would be pleasing to conduct the business of our city. With that, I'd like to recognize our Mayor Pro Tem for additions or deletions to the agenda. Councilwoman Diggs.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? With there being none, I make a motion that we accept the agenda as presented.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
second.
All right. Councilwoman Andrea Gregory, thank you. All those in favor of the agenda as presented, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Thank you. The minutes were distributed to council for their review before our meeting. Is there a motion to accept the minutes as presented?
I so move.
Thank you, Councilwoman Diggs. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilman Jerideau. All those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Moving on with our agenda to section number 2, presentations. This is a presentation of a proclamation of Constitution Week to the William Stroud Society of the Children of the American Revolution, the Henry Middleton chapter, the Trenton chapter, the Esther Marion chapter of the Daughters of the Revolution, and the Henry Lawrence chapter, Sons of the American Revolution. And I'd like to recognize our city manager, Mr. Stuart Biedenbaugh, for comment. Stuart?
Thank you, Mayor. It is Constitution Week, and as we have done most years, we have prepared several proclamations to present to these fine civic organizations: the William Stroud Society of the Children of the American Revolution, the Trenton chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Henry Middleton chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, Esther Marion chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, and the Henry Lawrence chapter, Sons of the American Revolution.
Thank you, Mr. Beedbaum. I'd like to, at this time, read into our records of proclamation, and then I think we're going to have a representative come up and address council. Following, I'd like to ask the representatives of our fine organizations who are here to come up. We have proclamations signed by all council members we'd like to present to you. So first of all, the proclamation reads, whereas the United States Constitution secures the blessings of liberty and justice for all Americans, and whereas September 17, 2019 marks the 232nd anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution by the Constitutional Convention, and whereas Constitution Week is a commemoration of America's most important document, whereas it is fitting and proper to accord official recognition to this magnificent document in its memorable anniversary, and to the patriotic celebrations which will commemorate it. And whereas learning about the principles of the Constitution allows us to reflect on the rights and privileges of citizenship. And whereas the United States Constitution stands as a testament to the tenacity of Americans throughout history to maintain their liberties, freedoms, and inalienable rights. Now, therefore, I, Rick Osmond, Mayor in the City of Aiken, and City Council do hereby designate September 17, 2019 as Constitution Day, and September 17th through the 23rd, 2019 as Constitution Week in Aiken, and encourage all citizens of the City of Aiken to renew and deepen their appreciation for the unique and precious heritage passed on to us by our founding fathers through the United States Constitution presented September 9th, 2019. And I would entertain a motion at this time from council to approve.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
All right, Councilman DeWar, is there a second? Councilman
second.
Councilman Waltz, thank you. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And of course, that's unanimous. And at this time, I think we would have a representative, John Vereen's, who's the president of the local chapter of the CAR, maybe to come up and make some comments. Good evening.
Hello.
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 Okay. Mr. Mayor and the City Council members, on behalf of the Liam Stroud Society of the Children of the American Revolution, along with the Trenton, Henry Middleton, and the Esther Marion chapters of the Daughters of American Revolution, and the Henry Lawrence chapter of the Sons of American Revolution, we thank you very much for proclaiming the week of September 17th to 23rd as Constitution Week. Constitution Day is September 17th, the day in 1783 that the Constitution was created. The Constitution is the supreme law of the United States of America. We are very blessed to live in a country with such a strong backbone. Thank you again.
Thank you for your comments. I'm sure everyone here will. I'm going to ask if all of our representatives who are here representing the different organizations would come up, and I'd like to pass these out, and we could certainly get a photo. If you want to come up in front of council, in fact, and council, you may want to move in.
He wants us to come down there?
Where do you want us to go?
I think he needs to come there.
Gary's walking off.
Now, do we have representatives of all the organizations here? Help me get these out.
I will be glad to.
Okay. I'll let you present those. Okay.
How about the Henry Livingston chapter of the DAR? And that would be Colatarsi. I'll get it right one day. Trenton chapter, and that would be and the William Stroud chapter, and that would be John Vereen's. Esther Marion chapter of DAR, that would be Julian. And lastly but not least, wherever he may be,
He's taking pictures.
Ted Walker of the Henry. Thank you very, very much for doing this for us.
Absolutely. Well, if you want to come in, maybe, you got the camera. I don't miss out on work.
If I could get a group picture?
You're the shorty.
Say Constitution.
Thank each of you for watching. Great organization. It's so good to see you.
Generated a lot of seats for the people on the floor.
He was precious.
Yes, he did.
Wasn't he so cute?
Whoever take some seats over here. We got some seats.
No front row seats.
There's a couple more seats if somebody wants to take them.
Before they all leave, I would like to say thank you to these organizations because they brought dinner for their city council tonight.
Mr. Mayor, my wife's in the back. Would somebody give her that cranberry recipe?
I have the fried chicken recipe, please.
Yeah, I vote we do that every time.
First, under new business, I think most people are here for it. And for those of you who came early and were very patient, thank you. We appreciate it. And I suppose we have folks watching in the overflow as well. Is that correct?
Approximately 30 people, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, yeah, we do have. So before we get to that, thankfully, council keeps the mirror straight. We have an item number 2 under presentations. This is an update by Arcadis on the downtown infrastructure project. It's been a priority for the city council for a number of years, and this company does great, and we enjoy quarterly updates from them. So, Stuart, if you would like to introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jim Shelton is here from Arcadis for the quarterly update. This is, I believe, the 5th one he's given us since they've begun the project that is rehabbing sewer lines primarily in our downtown area.
Right, they're not quite as old as the Constitution, but they sometimes seem that way. This is a project that we actually started last February, so we're about a year and a half in. We've got about 6 months to go, so we've got a lot of good things to talk about today. Really just want to give you an update on where we stand, what's left, what we found, and what we think still needs to be done. I'll just remind you all that your sewer system is comprised of almost 300 miles of pipe. And those pipes are made of a lot of different materials, the oldest of which are made of clay, actually terracotta clay, not even modern vitrified clay. About half of your inventory falls into that. And that's really the focus of the high-risk sewer project that we do, because many of those pipes are the oldest and were actually made from a lot of different manufacturers before there were standards. The project that we have is the prioritized Sand River basin pipes. These are all the pipes that flow through the primary basin in town. You can see the ones that are in red are the pipes that are focused in our contract. We've spent the bulk of the past year mostly up in North Side, all the way down through around Grace into the beginnings of horse country there, as well as in Hitchcock Woods in the off-season. We have rehabilitated most of the main sewer lines that go through Hitchcock. We're finishing up on some of the smaller lines that connect in through the south, and we'll be finishing up in the south side of the town soon. The work that we're doing is probably not been noticed because we use trenchless technologies. The primary technology we use is called chemical grouting. It's an older, tried and true methodology. It's one of the more it's actually the most inexpensive one, and it's actually a wonderful choice for what we're doing here. We do have a number of other technologies that are trenchless, as well as open cut that we'll be using as well, but that's the bulk of what we've done. As I said, the project, as it was originally assigned to us, was 44 miles. We've been through and assessed 40 miles of pipe. But what does that mean? That means we've gone in, we found them, which was surprisingly difficult, cleaned them, which was surprisingly difficult, and then put a robotic camera through to look at what the condition of the pipe is. So we're about 78% of the way through that assessment. Of the pipes that we've done, you can see that the roots, we have wonderful trees in our town, but there are a lot of roots that grow into those older sewers because of that. We've had to use chemical root treatment. They've been so bad that we've actually had to use that in order to kill the roots out. It doesn't hurt the trees. It's a localized type of thing, but it's much better than pruning them. If you prune them, they grow back even worse. So it gives you an idea of what the root issues are here in town as well. I like to throw these numbers out because they're huge. The tens of thousands of individual joints that we've gone through and individually tested, and then when they fail to hold an air test, grout it. It's quite significant. The grouting is the bulk of what we're doing. It's the heart of the project, and we're about 70% complete that work. When we go through and grout, we look at what the failure rates of the pipes are, and this really tells you is the money that you're spending worthwhile. When you see these high percentage rates, it shows you just how many of the joints in the system were leaking. Some of them were leaking because you can see the defects and the cracks and fractures that are around them, but many of them present themselves as perfect joints visually, but when you put a packer on them and air test them, you find that they leak. And if you had the camera in there when it rained, you would see all the water and sand running into the pipes. Well, we're sealing all of those shut, and you can see what we're seeing. On average, it's about 2/3 of the joints, so 2 out of 3 joints are failing to hold an air test. And we're pumping actually a lot more grout in them than we're planning. Typically, we're pumping about 6 gallons of grout into each joint that we find failed. In doing this, we're also stabilizing the pipe itself. Many of these pipes are almost 100 years old. The grout goes around the pipe and forms a cradle before it sets up. It's got about a 60-second gel time, and that stabilizes the pipe long-term as well as locking the leakage out. In the last 4 months, we've begun doing the tap connections to the pipe as well. The pipes I've been talking about are the ones that run in the street, but to get there, it's got to come from your house. And those are typically 4-inch in the older parts of town, 6-inch in the newer parts of town pipes that come out and connect via a tap connection, usually a T or a Y connection. And we're sealing those off as well because that's often a point of failure and a point of leakage. For this project, we're doing the first 6.5 feet, which gets us the tap connection, the first 2 or 3 joints going in. 9 out of 10 homes, tap connections fail the air test and have to be grouted. That's about twice the normal rate, so pretty high. We're using a lot of grout in order to do that. It's important to recognize that we have a fairly significant inventory of 6-inch pipe. And 6-inch pipe laid perfectly is rehabilitatable using these techniques very cost effectively. However, it has to be laid perfectly in order to get them through. About half of the 6-inch pipe we're not able to get the robots through, and for none of the 6-inch are we able to get the laterals or the tap connections. So that leaves a slight weak spot for the very oldest of our pipes. So something to keep in mind as we're planning projects for the future. The full length of the lateral as well goes all the way back to the property line and then into the house. In our experience, that portion of the system actually tends to leak even more than the mains. Again, food for thought as we're looking at asset management moving forward with the sewer systems. So let me talk a little bit about job-to-date performance. We've been through, as I said, 40 miles, and what we found in that 40 miles is that 2 of those miles are so badly broken, and the pictures to the bottom give you an idea of what a broken pipe looks like, that the technologies we're using can't be used. The best thing to be done with those is to line them, and that's what the picture on the left is. That's basically a sleeve of polyester that gets filled with a resin. Usually it's a polyester resin. It gets inverted into the pipe, fills it up, pushes out against it, and hardens in place. So basically, you're building a pipe in a pipe. We found 2 miles of those so far in the system. A number of those are going to get done under our current contract. The rest will be done using CPSD funds, some of which have already been allocated. Usually that number is much higher on a project like this, but because we have so many 6-inch pipes, and 6-inch pipes aren't lineable. If you line a 6-inch pipe, you're left with about a 4-inch pipe, and there's not much that's going to pass through a 4-inch main. So those end up having to be replaced where they're in bad shape, and we have quite a bit of that. Currently, just over 5 miles of sewer have been found to be so badly done that they have to go straight to replacement. So we'll use an open cut, or we'll use a pipe bursting technique for something like that. As I said, most of that is in the greenways. Many of these don't have manholes. Many of them just dead end with no way of getting into them. Lots of roots. Many of them are broken. The tap connections are very, very bad in many cases. So when we go to replace these, you'll see a significant level of service increase for those customers. The good news is that we found almost 3 miles of pipe that's in beautiful shape. Most of this is in Hitchcock Woods, and most of the work that we found in Hitchcock Woods was the bigger pipe. So we had a lot of money allocated toward fixing those pipes, and they turned out to be in wonderful shape. So that's a real savings back to us. Because of that, we're coming in well under budget, and the decision was made to add in 4 more miles of high-priority pipe that brings our total up to about 48 miles of pipe. So a significant increase in scope. That's part of why we're taking longer than what we originally thought. We talked to you before about excavator point repairs. There are certain portions of the system that we can't even get the cameras through. They've got collapses in them. We've been digging those up. We've identified 34 so far. 27 of them have been done, about half by Arcadis and about half by City of Aiken forces self-performing that work. City of Aiken forces have also constructed about a mile, not all in one place, but about a mile of new access roads, as well as cleared numerous easements to let us get back and look at pipes that in many cases hadn't been looked at in decades. Of the 1,100 manholes that have been in this project, we could not find 215 of them. That's how buried or in the back or how bad the maps were on this. We found almost all of them. There's still 14 that are playing hide and seek with us. We have a meeting tomorrow to see what we can do about those. And of course, when we find all this stuff, it's having huge improvements to your GIS, your graphical information system, which is used by your own engineering staff for managing things now and through the future, both from an operations and maintenance standpoint, as well as through your capital programs. So good information, accurate information leads to better programs. I want to remind you, I talked about this at our last update. One of the things that really surprised us here that was not expected was the number of defects that come from the joints. And it has everything to do with the age and the manufacture of these older 8, 10, and 12-inch pipes. In the past, these pipes would have had to have been lined. That would have been the next technology. And in round numbers, lining cost about 4 to 5 times as much as the grouting technique does that we're using. But we've invented a technique while we're here. It was an idea that we had brewing, and we thought we better try it here. And I've gone through and done a tally. It's called a low end element pressure technique. And we've sealed thousands of these, and it's resulted in a savings under the contract of about $2.5 million job to date. And so far, it's working very, very well. So we feel really good about that. Manholes we talked about the last time. The manholes are in generally good shape. You've got a couple of ones that are being attacked by sulfide gas, but in general, your system leaks enough that you don't get a lot of hydrogen sulfide buildup, which tends to dissolve the mortar and the concrete. What we do have is a lot of storm covers on sanitary covers. So when it rains, the sanitary system is actually acting as a storm system and letting the streets drain into the sanitary system. Helps flush them out, helps keep the odors down, but it also does tend to overwhelm things, and really shouldn't be that way. You've got a lot of places, too, where the pavement has been raised, but the cover not. Those all act as area drains as well. Those are projects that are scheduled to be done as part of what we're doing and as part of the next phase of work as well. There are several hundred of these that we've found so far, mostly in North Side. Prognosis, the work is taking longer because of all these things that we found. We really should have been done in June. We're not going to be done this work until the first quarter of next year. Part of that is adding the 4 miles of pipe that we added, but part of it is just the system leaks, so there's that many more repairs to be done. so it'll take us longer. The good news is, while it's taking longer, we're still going to finish under budget on the project, so that's looking very good as well. And the field observations, all that prognosis that I gave you, really helps your engineering department determine what to do next, where to spend the next round of money to get the biggest bang for the buck for your infrastructure renewal program. With that, I'll entertain any questions that you might have.
How far out have you gone from downtown? Have you gone to Woodside, Hounds Lake, and so forth?
No, Woodside, no. Woodside's mostly plastic pipe.
Okay.
The interceptors through Woodside are currently being contemplated. That's concrete pipe, and that's being contemplated as part of Phase 2. But the collector pipes through there are generally PVC, and so the considered judgment is we've got time before we need to worry about those. We'll need to worry about them, but we've probably got a couple decades. In Hounds Lake, we haven't prioritized the collection pipes, but we have prioritized what we call the trunk lines. These are the 12s, 15s, 18-inch pipes that run primarily through the golf course through there. So we've been trying to knock that work out before the cool weather starts and all the hackers go back out. And we're about halfway through that. We should be done that work by mid-October.
The hackers will be out there in the winter, too, so. In the summer.
I've got a question. You were talking about when you grout, you're grouting the inside, but at the same time, you talked about the outside.
Yeah,
didn't you?
actually, so
I'm
that's an important distinction. So there's two types of grouting in the world, maintenance grouting and capital grouting. Maintenance grouting is a short-term fix, and it's akin to running a bead of caulk where your tile and your tub connect. And that works fine until the water's on the other side and it pushes it out. That's a fix that lasts 6 months. This fix is a 25 to 50-year fix. And for that to work, we've got to get the grout so that it stays liquid and goes outside and mixes with the soils. Think of it like the Portland cement in a cement mix. And then it sets up. It locks the pipe in place. It helps glue the fractures closed. And it creates a seal. It almost looks like a bicycle, or a tire, really, inner tube, all around the outside of the pipe joint that leaked as
So
well.
it's going through the cracks.
Yeah, so when we put 4, 5, or 6 gallons out each joint, it's going out into the soil and surrounding the pipe. It's part of what gives it the longevity, too. You know, the sewers aren't the only utilities there. Every water line, cable line, gas line, everything that gets replaced moves the earth around. This technique helps to stabilize the soil. It gives it a lot of extra life structurally as well as from a leakage standpoint.
How do you find the manholes that seems to be hiding from
Do
you?
you know Troy Spann? Troy Spann is a guy that works for the city, and he has a special talent for finding these things. Not always the first time through. It's difficult, and sometimes we can't. We'll use tools. It's called a sonde. So we'll run a camera up a dead end, and it's got a radio transmitter on it, and you can trace it across the ground. We'll do that. But most of the time, it's Troy just kind of having an eye. He's really good at that.
We need to make sure we keep Troy.
I think they're going to hire him.
And what's the date of completion? Do you have any
I
idea?
don't have a hard date, but I'm hoping that we're going to be done by February 28th right now. We sat down 2 weeks ago and did a projection, and I believe that's where we're going to go. Since August, we've been hitting the project really hard. We've had anywhere from 5 to 8 crews working daily, so we're making really, really good progress. You don't see us because we're out in the middle of Hitchcock Woods right now, trying to get that done before the horses come back. And we'll be back out on the streets probably in about 3 weeks.
We thank you.
Welcome.
We do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. All right, moving down to an item, I think we moved this up first. This is a new business. First reading of an ordinance amending section 22-4 of the Aiken City Code regarding the discharge of firearms or other weapons by title, an ordinance amending section 22-4 of the Aiken City Code regarding the discharge of firearms or other weapons. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, Councilwoman Gregory, is there a second?
Second.
Councilman Girardeau? Comments from staff?
Thank you. And before I get into the comments, I do want to note that we do have folks on the first floor, residents watching this. There is about a 30-second delay, our videographer tells us, but we do have folks in the building on the first floor. Comments will be made here by folks at the podium per our normal rules, but this is a issue of tremendous interest, so we did open up extra seating and a way for folks to view it on a screen. Earlier this year, Mayor and Council, we were informed by the Woodside Plantation Property Owners Association that they were having issues with deer in the subdivision causing damage to landscaping and being perceived as a threat to safety. And they conducted a mail-in referendum, and in the midst of the referendum, we were made aware of this. So at that time, they did not consult with us about the fact that it is against our city ordinance to discharge firearms in the city. So what we have before you tonight is this amendment to the city code that is based on, I guess, the best legal advice we received. It is a citywide ordinance. It is in effect for the entire city, which would allow a firearm to be discharged. Essentially, the city code section 22-4 that's in question tonight currently has paragraphs A, B, and C. We are adding a paragraph D, which is mutually exclusive from the remaining paragraphs, and it would allow firearms to be discharged in the city in the event appropriate compliance is met with state law procedures in the eyes of DNR, and other appropriate statutes and regulations that would allow the removal of destructive and/or hazardous wildlife. And the permittee must comply with all the conditions of the permit that is issued by the State Department of Natural Resources, and any permit received would be shared and provided to the public safety chief prior to the discharging of any firearms in the city. So what we have before us tonight is an ordinance amending the section of the city code regarding the discharge of firearms to allow in the city the discharge of firearms, provided a permit has been issued by the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources that allow the removal of destructive and/or hazardous wildlife, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Beanbo. We have, and we're going to open it up for public comment, but we have representatives from DNR here. Not to put you on the hot seat, but we had a lot of questions in a work session beforehand that, before I open up the public comment, would you mind, and we appreciate you being with us tonight. Yeah, if you would, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Charles Ruth. I'm a wildlife biologist with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. I supervise the big game program, and obviously for the purposes of this discussion, big game includes deer. I'm here to answer any questions you have. I've been through this a number of times, and I want to offer words of encouragement. I know this is an emotionally charged issue. It's a difficult issue to resolve. I know it's new to you, but it is not new, okay? We started our, quote, urban or suburban deer management program about 20 years ago, and this came out of a need down in the Hilton Head Bluffton area, and it really started with Sea Pines Plantation, which is as upscale as you can get. I won't belabor the point, but they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars studying their deer issue. When they decided to act, it led to a lawsuit that actually went all the way to the state Supreme Court. And, you know, when it was all said and done, the Supreme Court upheld the lower court's opinion that, number one, the plaintiffs in the case, which were animal rights activists, had no standing, and that DNR, being the representative of the folks of South Carolina as it relates to these types of natural resources, could certainly work with private property owners to manage wildlife. So that's what we're talking about. Our role is to advise and consent. I'm here to advise if it gets to the point where this ordinance is amended and we would be in a position to issue a permit. That would be the consent part. So certainly I'll be glad to entertain. And let me finish up by saying that we have about somewhere between 20 and 25 communities that have participated in this type of management approach. And I want to say right now for everybody here, this is different than recreational hunting. Okay, the deer season is in right now for anybody that's appropriately licensed and has permission to hunt where they hunt. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a controlled removal with safety being of the utmost importance, okay? With that said, through this 20-year history of our program, there have been over 7,000 deer taken under these permits, most of which have been in the Hilton Head Bluffton area. And I know looking back on it, and I actually had a call from a property owner that's adjacent to Woodside today, and she was extremely concerned about her children, her pets, her house, her car getting shot. That has never happened. Again, this approach is geared towards safety. It's used way before we did any of this type of work in the Northeast, upper Midwest, where you have these huge metropolitan areas that have come in contact with these exurban deer populations. So it's old news up there, and it's now we've got a 20-year history here. So with that, I'll try to answer any questions.
Who actually should make the request to you in this particular case? Should it be the Property Owners Association of Woodside or the City of Aiken?
We deal with the POA or Board of Directors of a community.
Okay.
And they're charged with dealing with unraveling any local ordinances that would prevent them from acting on a permit if we were to issue it. Our approach is a delegatorial approach. In other words, we're giving the community the tools to try to help manage their situation.
Can you share with us the process that an organization has to go through to get approved through DNR?
Sure. And it has evolved over time. Initially, we required the development of a management plan, okay, and that was very expensive for these communities to do. But you know, after coming out of that lawsuit, we felt like that was the best approach. And after about 10 or 12 years of that, we started getting a lot of complaints because of the cost. Now they were having, and we don't do we did not do the management plans. We wanted a third party to do these management plans for the group and then submit them to us. And again, that's some of that legalese that we got involved with that Supreme Court case. That's no longer required. Really what's required now is that the entity, whether it be a POA or Board of Directors, whoever's in charge of the community makes a decision. And there are a number of things in our guidelines that they have to acknowledge. Number one being they're going to take responsibility for their actions, okay? But there's kind of a hit list of items that they have to acknowledge and sign off on. They have to do a population survey before, to submit with their formal request. So basically you've got a decision being made, a formal written request, acknowledging a number of points in our guidelines, and then include with it a survey of the deer in the area. And then we consider that for what it is and either issue a permit or don't.
Mr. Roof,
Yes, ma'am.
are there any other solutions to deer culling?
Sure. You can do nothing, live with them.
Mm-hmm.
You can use, and it's something that we emphasize all the time initially, recreational hunting. Okay? In the case of these communities in Hilton Head, and this is what bore out this different approach, they did not want to go the recreational hunting approach. And clearly hunting is extremely safe, but it's not as safe as operating under one of these special permits. And certainly if you look at these communities, you got houses all over the place, so they're the obvious concern.
I was thinking more on the line of repellents.
Repellents, fencing strategies,
Yeah.
so on and so forth. Normally, those are temporary or stopgap type of solutions. And the deer, whether you change the types of plants that you plant or go from using Irish Spring soap to a commercially available repellent, it wears off pretty quick.
How often would these cullings take place?
My experience in dealing with these other communities is, you know, in year one or two, you really kind of have to manage the situation and get the number of deer down to a reasonable level. Then, and this term comes from these communities, they kind of get in a management mode. They get the deer number where everybody seems happy, deer vehicle collisions go down, damage to ornamentals go down, the occasional entrance into a house. Deer start acting more like deer that our brains tell us how they act rather than, you know, being out in your yard when you're trying to walk to your car. So this maintenance mode, normally after a couple of years, these communities would remove very few deer every year or every other year. It never goes away because, you know, naturally these animals, prior to development, people were hunting these animals. You know, humans have changed the playing field several hundred years ago, removed all the natural predators. So we do bear some responsibility for managing these situations. And, you know, frankly, our agency, as you can appreciate, relies on recreational hunting from a big picture standpoint to manage the state's deer population. But there are situations like Hilton Head, Bluffton, perhaps Woodside, that recreational hunting just isn't suited for it.
My last question. New construction will continue to impact that population, that deer population? New construction,
Sure.
continued construction
But
in
I
that
will
area.
say, ma'am, that deer get along with this very well. And I think there's probably some folks here to attest that. They're very adaptable animals, and they have high reproductive rates for a large animal like that. And, you know, again, it's not going to go away.
Right. And even a fence wouldn't keep them out.
Sure, the right type of fence, if you go 7+ feet, it will keep them out. It may be unsightly, but fencing does work. Sure.
BOA has indicated to us that they have about 600 and they need to cull 200. Are you in a position to help them determine how many they have or to validate how they came up with that number and then how many they should cull?
Well, I would encourage you not to get too bogged down in exactly how many deer there may be. And what I mean by that, this is not a biological issue for the deer. We have had virtually no situations with these exorbitantly high deer populations or starting deer population at Sea Pines or Hilton Head Plantation, lots and lots of deer, a deer per 3 or 4 acres. The deer are fine. Okay, this is a human social issue. There are also human safety issues involved in it. So, you know, there is a way to survey deer. They have someone that has done one in the past for them the way that we like to see it done. But again, whether it's 552 or 493, don't go there. They've made the decision, or at least my understanding is that the majority of the folks out there have made the decision, it's too many. That's what's important, okay? These surveys are more of an index. In other words, don't get in, you know, 552, that's not what it's for. It's to establish a mark and then repeat it over time and see where it is. Counting animals is very, very difficult. So there are ways to kind of get close. But again, I would encourage you, let's don't get bogged down with trying to figure out exactly how many deer there are. Just follow the trends. Based on their survey work, they think there's too many. And that's the approach we've taken with these other communities. Some communities have a much higher tolerance for deer than others. So it's kind of they will know when they get where they want to be if they move ahead. And that's what we've seen with all these other communities.
I've got a couple of questions for you.
Yes, sir.
First of all, when you do a population count, I mean, if I've got 100 acres, you do a population count. If I've got 1,500 acres, do you just do one, or do you do so many per 100 acres or you know?
Right. Very good question. What you do is you delineate a transect through the property, regardless of what size it is, that wants to be representative of the different habitat types in the property and is long enough to get into most areas. And this is real basic math is what you do. You've got a transect. Even though it's curvy, it's a line. When you first do the survey, you take visibility measurements off of each side of your route, which gives you a width. So you've got length and width, you can determine an area. You're not surveying it on your 1,000-acre tract, you're not surveying every acre. You're doing enough of it to be representative, and then at the same time, you're counting deer. So going back and doing the simple math, you can come up with a deer per unit area, whatever area you want to, you know, if it's a deer per, how many deer per square mile, or how many acres per deer, then you apply your sample. It's a sampling process. You apply your sample to your 1,000 acres or your 2,000 acres or your 500 acres.
Right, and I may not have an exact memory here, but it seems like when I read their survey numbers, they surveyed a larger area one night and then surveyed a smaller area the next night, and of course had more deer in there. Who decides where you pick out where to survey?
Their consultant.
Okay. And when you say they are responsible for this, are they required, amongst other things, to post insurance or anything on this, or they're just responsible for something happening?
That's up to them. The insurance part would be up to them. As far as we're concerned, they're responsible. You know, if something breaks bad, understand it never has, they're responsible for it.
And do you all supervise any of this, or?
Yes, well, we're not on site.
Right.
Okay. You're looking at the deer guy for the state.
You're it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you say, okay, you can do it, but you're not on site. You don't regulate when they do it or how they do it?
That's correct. They would choose the contractor both to do the survey and to do the sharpshooting. There are a couple of requirements that we have on the sharpshooting. We've changed that over time, again, for cost savings. From a cost savings standpoint, I can tell you there's only about 4 contractors that are doing that type of work in the state.
And is each contractor one person, or is that a group?
I think 3 of the 4 are individuals. 2 of those are professional wildlife biologists. One of them is USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. They have a branch called Wildlife Services, so that's a much larger group. They do some of that work. They do a lot of the same thing on military bases. Of course, they don't deal with DNR on military bases. They basically do what they want to keep deer and other animals off of airfields and so forth. So.
And then finally, you're not the one who decides if there's too many deer. You let the property owners decide.
That is correct. Absolutely.
So it can be 1 deer or 100. It's up to them.
Generally, I tell folks when I get in these situations, if I'm here, at least in their minds, there's too many deer. Okay? Mm-hmm. They're not going to have gone through everything they've gone through and figure out who at DNR, how to contact Charles. This is about the 4th time I've been over here over the last 4 or 5 years. So, again, this is what I do, partly. We have research, we have hunting and so forth, but I found myself in this position over the last 25 years as, suburbia has hit with deer. And my experience is if they figure out who to contact, and I make repeated trips to meet with their POA or to come before council, they think there's too many deer, and we're not going to argue that.
So local DNR officer won't be around either?
No, sir. The deer are required, if they were to move ahead, they have to pay for the cost of the processing of the deer. The deer have to go to a charitable institution. They can't keep the deer, which is something to prevent bad stuff, they would have to donate the deer and so forth. This is not cheap. I don't know what the cost per deer from the Hilton Head Bluffton area is. I'm thinking it's probably average 150 to 200. 40 or 50 of that's going to be the processing. 100
Per
to 100
deer? I'm
me?
sorry. I'm just shocked here.
If you look at sea pines, now this goes back 20 years.
Deer.
The first 2 years on sea pines, they removed 500 deer. What we just saw about the drainage, these communities have as part of their annual budget deer management.
And who pays for that?
Property owners.
Yeah.
From a standpoint of the process, and from what you just said, maybe you know, maybe you don't, but as I understand it, they're going to pick a site, or remote as they can make it. How big a site does that entail?
That's going to ultimately be up to them. Typically, where these deer, once a decision is made and they've gone through all the processes and we have issued a permit, it's all about safety. So they're going to try to find, these deer are baited, that's part of the safety. They're removed primarily at night, that's part of the safety because folks aren't out messing around. They're going to have green spaces, common property, by permission on individual property owners' property. But again, it's designed for safety. That's what it is.
Well, it's not going to be multiple sites.
Sure.
Could it be multiple sites in terms of
Yes,
setup?
sir. Most of, there's two approaches that these contractors use. They will do more something like a deer hunter would do. He would have a stand, a fixed stand in a wood lot where, he would climb up in there and wait for the deer to come to where they need to be safe.
Right.
But most of these deer are removed driving. In other words, you've got your places set where they're safe,
Right.
and you move through the community. It's much more efficient that way.
So I have a question as far as the contractors that are hired to come in and call the deer. There's an impression out in the community that anybody could go to the state and get a license and get authorized to do this type of thing. And you're mentioning 4 main contractors within the state of South Carolina that you encourage these organizations use, or you recommend them, or what is?
Yeah, we don't, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we don't make recommendations. That would be a loser for us. It would open us up to a suit of some sort. Like a lot of things, this has a way of working out. We've had a 20-year history. There's still only 4 people or 4 groups that are doing it. Our initial requirements on the sharpshooters were that they had to have, they had to be a certified wildlife biologist, which there's only about 4,000 on the planet Earth. Okay, so again, that drove the expense of all this way up. So after dealing with these communities for a decade, we said, okay, we're going to listen to you. We looked at the data, we talked to our board, and we got rid of that because ultimately they're going to make right decisions.
So anybody can be a licensed,
There's no license.
There's no license.
No, sir.
Anybody can be a sharpshooter.
Yep. One caveat is that kind of separates them out is they have to use sound suppressed weapons. That's very expensive. There are federal permits involved, there are state permits involved. Not every Tom, Dick, and Harry is going to have that ability, if that makes sense to you. So someone that has gone to that extreme, have sound suppressed, paid those licenses, dealt with the feds and the locals on that. It's not hard to do. There is a process that you have to go through to have suppression. And we felt like that was one thing we wanted to hang on. Plus, it's just a better situation for the community. You don't have these reports. You can imagine that, and I'll give you an example. A typical community that has just started, let's say it's 2,000 acres, they've got to remove 75 deer. This contractor is going to spend about 2, maybe 3 nights there, and they're done. This is not weeks and weeks and nights and nights.
So in your experience, you trust that the governing body of whoever's requesting this permit will choose the correct contractor, so forth and so on. And in your experience in South Carolina, it's been those top four.
That's
it appears
correct.
to be what you're saying.
I will provide the names of whoever's in the pot at the time. At this time, it's 4. I'm not going to say which one may or may not be better because I really don't know. There's so few of them. And so far, with a little over 20 years, it's all good.
And just to reiterate what Councilman Gerardo said, as far as the locations, and you're saying they're going around in some kind of automobile, of course. I'd like to assume that, you mentioned you're pinpointing common areas or wooded lots where the cull will occur. So there shouldn't be a concern, for example, I'm a resident of Woodside, by the way, that this automobile is driving by with a sniper on the back and he sees 3 deer in front of my house and he's going to shoot the deer and my house is behind it. It's
all about safety. It's all about safety.
They could shoot there.
Well, that's going to ultimately depend on what the property owners have decided, working with their contractor. Clearly, if you've got a house, a vacant lot, and then another house, and this party is okay, this party is okay, and whoever owns the vacant lot is okay, absolutely. But that contractor, he's going to look at the back. He's going to be mindful of that. Again, we're looking at, as I said, 7,000 plus deer in that Hilton Head Bluffton area, no issues. That's what this is all about. It's about, removing deer to get them to a manageable situation as efficiently and as safely as possible.
Can they shoot coyotes while they're right there?
I would say no at this point. There's a lot better ways.
Would they be prohibited from doing that?
Now, certainly, there are other ways to manage. Trapping is the best way to manage coyotes.
But could they do it?
If it was in part of the permit, now we've never had that as part of a request.
Okay.
Because you're the deer guy. Because you're the deer guy.
No, I deal with coyotes a good bit as well.
Gotcha.
That's what he said.
Coyotes eat deer fawns, so,
yeah. And that's one of the reasons Woodside is in that predicament, is because that natural predatory process has somewhat been compromised. And so.
I think what I'm hearing from you is that council's getting too much into the weeds. Our role tonight, and if we approve this to second reading, is to enable Woodside to do what they want to do. And right now they can't because our city ordinance prohibits it. So if we now approve that, then we're out of it. We've done what the limits of our responsibility, and it would be up to the Woodside Property Owners Association to deal with a lot of the questions that members of council have asked.
I think that's well said, and I think DNR 20 plus years ago, we were in a similar situation. However, all the laws fell under us, and we just didn't have, at the time, we had not used the laws that were on the books to come up with these alternative ways for people to handle their problems. So, and that's kind of what spawned our urban deer management approach.
When you dealt with issues in Hilton Head and Bluffton and so forth, I know there's a lot of difficulty within Woodside right now, opinions all over the place, and I would even venture a percentage, but in Hilton Head and Bluffton, were there difficulties and that those communities getting together to come up with a program that they would all buy into, or were there still people that didn't agree that things should be done?
Sure. This is standard procedure, and I know you're going to hear from some folks, which I totally respect, but we had our Supreme Court case with the folks that didn't agree with killing deer. Keep in mind that 200,000 deer will be killed by hunters in South Carolina. It's ongoing as we speak. The courts found favor in our direction, but once we got through that and kind of got a couple of case studies, it got really quiet. And I'll tell you this, we were when I say we, DNR, the property management group down there, including the University of Georgia, who Sea Pines had enlisted and spent lots of money for the University of Georgia to research their deer problem, we were the plaintiffs, the defendants in the case. The local paper down there just absolutely ate us up for about 3 years. And about 3 years ago, after close to 20 years in lots of these communities doing it, they actually came out with an op-ed that was extremely favorable and complimentary of what had transpired over the last 15 or 20 years. It blew me out of the water that they would have come back and said, look, this does work. These people are solving their problems. Human safety, people riding around shooting everything up, that hasn't been borne out. So that made me feel real good.
Charles, I appreciate all the information that you've shared with us, and yes, we're about to hear soon from our constituents regarding any concerns or people that are for this. And I feel like we really needed to wrap our head around the Woodside issue, but to Councilman DeWar's point, the reason we're here is because, yes, granted, Woodside, because of the Woodside situation, we're here, right? The ordinance got brought before us, but at the end of the day, tonight, we're here because this potential amendment affects the entire city as a whole. And so the question is simple, I'm a Woodside resident, but right now I have to take off my Woodside resident cap, and now I'm going to put on my city council cap. And as a city council member, I have to worry about my district and, most importantly, the city as a whole. And so what is the best thing and the right thing to do for the city as a whole? And that's why we're here tonight. And if we look at this particular ordinance, and we discussed this during the work session, and for those of you that were not at the work session, the ordinance consists of Section 22-4, Sections A, B, and C. Section A, which specifies that the discharge of firearms within the city limits is prohibited. And Mr. Smith, our city attorney, please, if I make an error at any point, please correct me.
Yes, ma'am.
And unless you are in imminent danger of an animal, you can dispose of that animal with a firearm. In addition to armed force celebrations and so forth and so on, where they would discharge a firearm for something of the sort. That's Section A. Section B states landowners discharging a firearm on that landowner's property, basically to protect landowner's family, employees, and general public, or the landowner's property from animals that the landowner reasonably believes pose a direct threat. So the difference being in Section A is an imminent threat to a landowner, regardless of their property size. Section B is that there is a danger on their property, and if their property consists of 25 acres, contiguous acres, then they can dispose of the threat, whether or not it's an imminent threat right in front of you at that moment in time. Section C basically states that nothing in the code shall prevent the discharge of firearms on the Aiken Department of Public Safety firing range in accordance with their procedures and or on approved indoor firing range constructed, operated, and maintained within all applicable local, state, and federal rules, regulations, and laws. So the amendment is obviously now moving this one step further. And these various sections, based on our work session, we were informed were added at different periods of time because things arose. And so I think that's where we are right now. We've moved into the future. Our community is evolving, whether it's our neighborhoods, parks and recreation, schools and city property, whatever the case may be. This new potential amendment to this ordinance still prohibits the discharge of firearms within the city limits, correct, Mr. Smith?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So nobody is allowed to discharge a firearm within the city limits if A, B, and C are not met. And if you do, and I'm only reiterating this because I have fielded many phone calls, emails, and visits and coffee dates with many of my constituents about this. And I just want to reiterate it. It is not allowed. And if somebody does discharge a firearm within the city limits that do not fall, and their reasoning behind it does not fall within sections A, B, and C, Chief Baranko would not be happy. So that is against the law. We would be breaking city ordinance, and there are consequences to that, and severe ones. Section D, which is the potential amendment, which is an addition to the current ordinance. Okay, so I want to reiterate, the discharge of firearms within the city limits is prohibited unless a permit issued by the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources pursuant to South Carolina Code sections, and it reads off numbers, and other appropriate statutes and regulations that are promulgated by the state of South Carolina to permit the removal of destructive or hazardous wildlife. And I'm going to stop right there. Remember, we're here because we have to look at this ordinance citywide. We live in a rural community surrounded by rural county in some areas. So citywide, if we have an issue with whether it be deer, snakes, rabid raccoons, and I've talked to DNR actually, and they have presented me with many different cases of various situations that have arisen. If something like this becomes an issue in our Parks and Rec, in a school zone within the city limits, do we want the option and the opportunity to deal with it? It's been brought to my attention that raccoons can't be relocated, actually. That is just not allowed. So what would we do then? What is the only option with raccoons if they're rabid or something like that?
Well, rabid ones obviously need to be put down, and that's primarily the reason you can't relocate these fur-bearing animals is because rabies control.
Is an issue. So
Exactly.
there's so many scenarios out there, and I want to share this with my council colleagues, that can arise in our community. And it's no longer a Woodside issue.
I'm not sure I agree, if I can interrupt. He's involved with issuing the permit. He's into deer management. He's not into raccoon management. I would not expect him to issue a permit for anything other than deer. That's the major issue. Have you issued permits other than deer?
Small, fur-bearing animals, raccoons, possums, foxes, coyotes, there's a much easier way.
And we have an animal control officer within the city to deal with that as well.
My experience is local animal control, if the caller says anything about a wild animal, they're going to say call DNR. These other species that you're talking about are most commonly trapped, which doesn't involve a firearm.
So what would you do in the case of another animal that can't be relocated?
There are ways that you can get a trapping permit right now.
So you would remove them and dispose of them?
Yes, state law says, and this isn't DNR, state law says that if you are removing or trapping for nuisance purposes, things like raccoons, possums, fur-bearing animals, that you've got two options. You can't relocate them. That's disease management. They either euthanized or released on the site, which kind of defeats the purpose of catching them in the first place.
Exactly. So
I guess the distinction here is from a deer versus raccoons and possums and things like that is the technique, the management technique. On the deer side, it's shooting. That's why we're here tonight. On the fur-bearing animal side, there are other ways to do it that don't go against the city code or most city codes, and that's trapping. And there's a number of different permits that we can issue. We have a trapping season. We can issue special permits outside the trapping season as well. It's kind of like we're talking about special permits for deer.
what other animals would require culling like the deer? Wildlife?
I can see from time to time you have an eruption in raccoons or something like that. We've had it on some of the barrier islands in the past. Those populations are much more boom and bust. In other words, they rise up for some reason. Food availability in a given year. They have very high reproduction. They have high survival in that year, and there's a lot of them. But they go away. Mother Nature has a way of working on them. Distemper is a big player for raccoons and possums, so they just all of a sudden disappear because they've died. Deer are fairly long-lived. They're much more high profile, as you know. The management technique is shooting.
Sterilization.
Sir?
Sterilization work?
Not at this point. You know, I've been in this business going on 30 years now, and some of the approaches, there are a couple of techniques that have been through FDA, EPA, fertility control techniques. They're coming above board. Still primarily experimental. There's one in particular that has passed muster. It can be used in a management type setting. I won't get into the details, but it is extraordinarily expensive because you have to catch the deer. And that just, you know.
Right.
The cost of shooting a deer is one thing, and the cost of catching a deer is something altogether different. So that particular fertility control drug hasn't been registered in South Carolina. We are kind of talking about, and this would be up to USDA. You know, it's under their umbrella. We would have to agree with them registering it. It could only be used by them or us. It's not, you know, we're talking about a whole nother layer of bureaucracy. And in the efficacy of these chemicals, you know, you may catch 100 doe deer, give them their vaccine, and it may work on 70 of them. If you leave 30% of the doe deer fertile, you're backing up. So anyway, it's something to think about for the future.
Okay.
I do have a question pertaining, hopefully you can answer this. From listening to you talk about moving around and doing the different areas, is there a limit as to how effective this becomes based on how far away from the site you are? Where residential, where the problem is, like, let's say you did it within a mile, is that going to have any effect on the neighborhoods, or does it have to be closer than that?
Yeah, I mean, deer generally in these types of settings are going to have a home range in the 400 to 600 acre.
Right.
So, you know, based on the experience down in the Beaufort County area, to answer your question, it does work on a given piece of property, but there's always going to be movements.
Yeah.
There's always going to be reproduction. That's what necessitates an annual or biannual approach with it.
Well, I guess my question would be, if you're a mile away from the nearest house, a good example, a mile into the woods, is that going to be effective for getting rid of the deer in that particular, for those houses that are being affected?
Probably not a mile away. In other words, if this podium is the property of interest,
right,
and you're a mile away, you're probably not, you as a deer would most likely not be affected by what's going on right here.
Right.
That's not to say that occasionally
they don't go there.
You don't go there.
Right.
That you could end up there.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of talk about a home range of, you know, like I said, 400 to 600 acres, which is 600 is about a square mile. Mm-hmm. But we have found that in these suburban settings, those home ranges shrink down.
Okay, that answers. Thanks.
You're sure glad you came.
Yeah.
Questions, Mr. Ruth, and again, I apologize. I'm certainly not trying to put off our public hearing, but there are so many questions, and we really do appreciate you being with us. I was somewhat taken by that there's actually no license to the shooters given by DNR. I mean, it seems like, as you said, it's not every Tom, Dick, and Harry, but if they're wealthy enough to get the suppression, it could be a Tom, Dick, or Angie shooting.
It could be, surely. And we had reservations.
My wife's name, by the way.
When we removed that criteria for them to be a certified wildlife biologist, you know, we had some reservations, but we went through 10 years. The communities were just screaming about the expense, and it really didn't change anything. You know, this is really hard work. It's specialty type work. And I know to some guys, oh yeah, we're going to go through all this and we're going to go out and shoot some deer at night. Well, that lasts for about 1 or 2 nights, and you quickly figure out this is not easy and it's hard and there's expenses involved in it. So the permit that we issue to the community permits their contractor at the same time.
Do you check with the local law enforcement of the area, or is that the job of the community?
When we issue a permit, in fact, I drafted a permit for signature today for a community up the Savannah River up in McCormick County. We copy our local conservation officers with that. Of course, these permits are fairly open-ended dates, so just to let them know if they get calls about lights or something like that, they're going to have an idea of what it may be. But, you know, again, looking back on it.
Do these permits have no expiration?
Yes, they do have an expiration. Normally, effective date September 15 through March 1.
And that's it?
That's it.
They have to apply again next year?
That's correct.
So you give the permit to the organization?
To the community, to what I call the entity, whether it be the POA or Board of Directors. Yeah.
And so in Aiken's case, the ordinance states that the permittee shall submit a copy of the DNR permit to Chief of the Department of Public Safety, so that would be, the organization would give the permit to Chief, okay, gotcha.
Yes.
And they could certainly request as part of their, include as part of their request for us to copy whoever they desired.
So permits don't run concurrent necessarily with season?
They go, all deer seasons in South Carolina end January 1st.
Right.
Okay? These permits go to March 1st for 2 primary reasons. Once you get past the first of the year, we're really in winter, and baiting becomes much more effective. Again, we're trying to put these animals in a safe place to be removed, so that's important. On the other end, on the March end, we want to have a buffer for fawning season. In other words, we don't want to be out with fawns already being born and then you're removing female deer. So we've
Right.
That's the logic behind that.
There's no doe season or anything like that? It's just...
No, but it's generally, inherently, it's focused on female deer because that is what is going to solve the problem the quickest. Understand that once you get after the first of the year, increasingly you have antler drop in males. So it can become difficult to determine males versus females. But again, if you look at the plus or minus 7,000 deer that have been removed, I hate to keep talking about the Beaufort County area, I would say 5 to 5,500 of those are females. That's what changes the playing field. You know, shooting males is not going to decrease reproduction.
You mentioned that one of your stipulations is that for any entity in the state of South Carolina, if they move forward with culling, that they harvest the deer?
No, any deer that they take under the permit, they have to pay for the cost of processing, and then they have to arrange for it to be donated to a local charitable institution.
That's a requirement for them to get that permit?
Yep. They can't keep it in the community. And people find that odd, but there's, early on in this, we knew better than to let people, give somebody a special permit to shoot deer at night and then let them keep the deer. That won't work. Mm-hmm. So they have to encumber that cost of processing and then donating.
Is there a particular parcel size or I mean, I know I'm familiar with sea pines. That's a huge footprint.
Mm-hmm. Well, sea pines, and that's a good point, but what I would say, sea pines is a little over 5,000 acres. It has 5,000 homes, and that doesn't include commercial properties. So I don't know how many, Woodside I've heard is 3,000 acres. I don't know how many homes. So I'm assuming we're probably talking about something that's very similar. Obviously, sea pines is much larger, but 5,000 homes on 5,000 acres. Again, we leave that up to the community. The community is going to get with the contractor and say, look, here's our situation, you need to do your research, and then come back and we'll go and say, this is good, this is bad, and so on and so forth.
I guess, Ms. Ruth, I'm asking for the next community in our city that may come up and ask you,
Sure.
and maybe they don't have 3,000 acres. And I'm just trying to figure out how you determine where's the cutoff, where is it too small to do this? Is my cul-de-sac with 7 houses too small?
Well, that's a good question. And I will admit that we have not had to deal with that. The property up in McCormick County that I drafted a permit for signature today, it's on the lake, it's a point, it's only 150 acres. That's kind of the weird one that we've got out of our 25-ish of the life of this program. Most of them are 1,000 acres or more. So we really, to be honest with you, we really haven't crossed that bridge.
I want to commend you on having 20 years of great success here in safety. But how far can you stretch that rubber band till something breaks? Don't know.
Again, when we started 20 years ago, we looked to the Northeast and the upper Midwest. It was already old news there. They enlist their local police officers to do this type of work up there, among others. So, we can only look and see what else is going on. We certainly didn't invent this here in South Carolina.
I'm sure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Ruth. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I wish you luck on it.
Thank you.
So do we.
We're going to open it up for comment. Again, I'd like to, I'll recognize you. Again, I'd like to say, I will recognize you. All comments are to be addressed to me, the chair. This is about an issue. This is about what we're addressing as far as law. This is not about individuals. So I don't want to have to gavel anyone down because it's not in my personality, but I will, because if it starts addressing any individual and doesn't talk about the issue at hand, it's important that we stay focused on this. The council is here to hear public hearing because we want to gather more information, and I appreciate so much Mr. Ruth being here. He answered so many questions that we had from earlier. And hopefully a lot of you heard some things that maybe you hadn't heard also. So I'm going to open it up for conversation. As we go through, as I start hearing similar things, I'm going to ask, is there anything that hasn't been said? Because it's not about hearing the same thing volume over and over again. It's about new information so that we can make an informed decision. Everyone will certainly have an opportunity also to show through a public show of where you stand on this issue. So with that, I am going to open it up. You raised your hand first. I'm going to recognize you. Mary, I'd like for you to speak second since you represent the PLA. So good evening. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Ralph DeCibio. I'm a Woodside resident for many years at 270 Magnolia Lake Road. My sense of it is that this vote is not really about a deer call, or it's not about sharpshooter skills or safety. This vote is about two things that I think the voters will remember. It's about amending an ordinance that was originally designed to enhance the safe environment of the community. The change now reverses that and allows for firing weapons within the city limits, which kind of defies logic. Regardless of all the new rules and regardless of the state involvement, it does nonetheless possibly make firing weapons in the community legal. Why would you consider this? Well, the change was demanded by a persistent POA because a vote was taken, and by a 564 vote plurality, they insisted on a citywide change. This, even though there are, in fact, other ways to control the deer population. Amending this ordinance, secondly, turns over your authority to the state, to the deer man, to issue a permit. We elected you to provide for the safe environment, and you did so, and you did it thoughtfully when you did the original ordinance. You didn't call the state to ask them if that was the right thing to do. You did it to provide for a safe environment. You're now considering giving up local control because of a tiny segment of the community. Local control. This is what we elected you for. It's not difficult to wash your hands of the problem, and our dear man suggested that once they issue the permit, they wash their hands. We don't know who's going to do the shooting. It'll be up to Woodside. The issue to me is clear. Why would you reverse an ordinance that was designed to protect the citizens? Why let the state make decisions that you should make? A yes vote on both is both of these things. I really feel to some degree the amendment is flawed. And I heard you in your working session talk about, well, the state will confer with and consult with our law enforcement agency, I imagine. Well, we can't imagine. Should they not be required, before they issue a permit, to consult with you, to consult with our law enforcement agencies? Why can't the amendment say something about consultation and agreement? You're turning over all authority to the state. I would suggest to you that if you're leaning in the direction of voting yes, you think about tabling this and letting the rest of the community be heard, as opposed to putting this through to the second reading. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Sibia. Appreciate that. Mary, I'd like to ask you to...
Certainly. Good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Mayor and council members. Woodside Plantation Board of Directors is requesting City Council to amend the city code to allow us to address our problem that we have. There is a presentation, but I'd like to give you some history in terms of what we went through to get to this point. In 2014 and 2015, we started receiving complaints from our property owners regarding deer damage. And in October of 2015, we conducted a survey via SurveyMonkey, rather informal survey, to ascertain what the deer impact really was. We asked if there were traffic accidents, how much damage was being done, what were they spending. At that point, there wasn't enough information or there wasn't enough support to really do anything with the deer. Come along 2017 and 2018, and the number of complaints had increased significantly. In May 2018, we conducted another monkey survey and found that there was a desire to do something about the deer issue. It showed increased deer damage. In 2018, we held a town hall with our property owners, and we addressed both sides of the issue, the pros and the cons. Because of that 2018 town hall, we really didn't know what issue we had. We had no way of quantifying it. And so we hired Folk Land Management to come in and do a count for us. And in 2019, in February of 2019, we had an official ballot vote, which we issued to all of our property owners. It was done in accordance with our covenants. And so based on that, we proceeded to request some assistance. The result of that deer count, we have a property of approximately 3,000 acres. The deer density was recorded on 2 consecutive nights. The process was described. We drove along, and I actually went along with floodlights counting the deer. Based on that, there were approximately 600 deer in the fall of 2018. That methodology that was used as a survey spotlight methodology is approved by the Quality Deer Management Association. It's used by quite a few communities that do deer counts. The streets, all of the streets in Woodside were considered as targets of the count. They divided those streets into 7 different areas. They mapped them out, and that's the route that they took. The second night, they followed the exact same route. When they come back to do another count, they will follow the exact same route. So there is some...
Mary, when are they coming back to do that?
In October. The result of the ballot vote was 1334 and 746 against. So it was...
Mary, can you, sorry, I might stop you a couple times as you go.
That's all right.
Can you articulate, and I've gotten a lot of feedback about this particular topic, can you articulate who comprised the vote? Just shed some light on basically who voted, who got how many votes, so forth and so on.
Certainly. Our covenants, I'm going to do this from memory. So our covenants divide votes into 4 types. First, there's the lot or homeowner. Each lot, home that you own gives you 1 vote. There's another type, Class B, which is based on the number of acres. We have 0 votes in that category. Type C are the golf courses. Each hole which is assessed an assessment is given 5 votes. So both Club Corps as well as the reserve were actually voted. And there's another category, which I'm forget. If you are assessed by acreage, and we have no properties that are assessed by acreage. So the votes are basically per lot with a home on it. It's one vote, or the golf courses.
And so on the golf course set, let me understand this. So aside from the residents, each golf course gets 5 votes per hole.
Per hole assessed.
Do you know how many holes are assessed out there? There's 3 golf courses out there.
Club Corps.
4, sorry. Yes, that's right, because the reserve has 2.
Club Corps is assessed on 45. Thank you. Thank you. Club Corps. Club Corps is assessed 5 votes per hole. They have 45 holes, so that's 225 votes. The Reserve Club, not all holes are assessed there. They are afforded 5 into 13 is 35 holes. No, 130 total votes. So
For all 4 courses?
For Reserve Club, we have basically 1.5.
I'm sorry.
Woodside, the Club Corps has, they have 45 holes, basically.
Right. And what about the reserve?
The reserve has 18, and I have to do some math here. I'm sorry. 16, no.
So they've got about 350 votes.
It's 130. They were given 130 votes.
The reserve.
So divide that by 5, and that tells you how many holes there are.
She's right.
At about 350 votes.
So a total of 350 votes?
About 350, yeah.
For the golf courses.
You were correct.
Makes sense. That's.
I don't think we should keep interrupting our speakers to keep track of time, but I'm going to, since we're asking
These were
questions,
serious concerns brought to my attention, which I think we need to address.
Of the lots, how many did the developer own of the lots?
For the lots, the type A votes, there's 2,447.
How many are owned by the developer?
I don't know. You would have to ask. I mean, I just don't have that information with me. And technically, some of that is confidential. I mean, if someone came to me and asked me how many votes you had, I would have to say that they need to ask you, because
Well, I mean, we're able to get them for the golf course, so I just,
Pardon me?
since we can get them for the golf course, I think we'd have them for the developer.
I just gave, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
Of your single-family lots that are out there, some are undeveloped.
Yes, they are.
How many of those undeveloped lots got a vote?
If they're, well, all of them.
All of them, okay. How many is that total?
I don't know the breakout between undeveloped lots and lots that have homes on them, but a total of both categories of a lot, an undeveloped lot or a lot that has a home on it, was 2,447.
Okay, so a certain amount of those lots, say 200 of them right there, would be developer lots. 300 went to the golf courses. That's roughly, we'll say 550, so it could be 550, 650 votes went to the developer in the golf course. Is that right?
Well, the developer doesn't own
Potentially right, I
Woodside
should say.
Country Club. That's run by Club Corps.
Okay. But I'm talking about the lots. You've added all those together. How many institutional votes were there?
I don't have that information with me.
Okay.
I'm happy to provide it to you.
Yeah.
If you. I
Okay.
mean, I can send it to Mr. Biedenbaugh, and he can disseminate it if it's.
So, I mean, you own a lot, you own a lot. Whether you're the developer or a private owner, it's private ownership, you get a vote for each lot. I mean, I'm going to move past that, but I'm still kind of stuck on the golf course because I'm trying to understand those particular votes. And so maybe I'm just not getting it, and I apologize to my colleagues, but I really want to understand that if Woodside Plantation Country Club, Jones and Cup Course get 45 votes, or 45 allocations, 5 votes a pop, right?
No, they get, yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
so you're looking at 225 right there. So now we've broken down Woodside, old Woodside, so now let's look at Reserve,
They get 130
total votes,
total.
times 5.
No,
No.
Just total?
just
Okay.
total.
All right. So we're looking
Woodside
at
Country-
355 votes that came from the golf
Correct.
courses, and the Club Corps and the Reserve.
Correct.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay. We have, during the final survey that we did with Monkey Survey, we asked property owners to define the economic impact that they had incurred. And specifically, browse damage was significant, over $59,000 for landscape repairs. Many people did not track expenditures. I mean, you go out, you buy deer repellent, you replace bushes, trees, plants. This isn't browse damage that just destroys a few petunias. This is major damage to bushes. Recently, we had some new landscapes put in on a home that was just built, and in 2 days, everything that had been planted was basically eaten down. One resident informed me that he had redone his landscaping recently. We have some rather strict covenants on what landscaping is supposed to look like, and $10,000 of investment was basically ruined. The POA, we have a lot of common property. We have spent over $22,000 for bush replacement, and I can tell you that there are still numerous bushes that need to be replaced because they have been eaten beyond coming back. The deer are eating plants and bushes that they've never touched before. Yes, we even publish a list of deer-resistant plants on our website, but it doesn't seem to help because they are eating things. They're eating loropetalums, they're eating pittosporin, marigolds, hollies. So we have tried to basically keep the deer away and reduce the damage by using repellents and deer-resistant plants. Native plants in our wooded areas are being eaten to devastation. And we're not talking about 1 or 2 deer coming into a yard. We're talking about herds. I have a video that showed 20 deer in 1 yard on Sugar Maple. I have another video that shows 7 deer on West Pleasant Colony. So car incidents. We've had 25 car incidents over 3 years. Now, that may not be a lot, and luckily no one was injured, but there was some significant damage. In 2019, we've had 3 incidents with damage greater than $10,000 per accident. This isn't a matter of people just speeding. This is a matter of sometimes of just deer running into a car. Your car is driving down the road and the deer impacts it. We've had a number of carcasses that have been removed from roads, and that number increases. Home damage, 21 instances where deer damaged the residence. In one instance, we had a deer run through one glass door and out another window. It came into the house. We have deer impaled on fences. If the fence isn't tall enough, they just can't get over. We've looked at alternative methods of deer herd management. We've looked at sterilization. It's not allowed. Birth control chemicals, we cannot use them by South Carolina. Capture, transport, and release, we cannot do that because South Carolina doesn't really enable us to do that. What is allowed is either sharpshooting with a permit or recreational hunting. Recreational hunting is done during the day. We have a lot of people that are out in their yards, a lot of people that walk our trails, and so we don't think that recreational hunting is acceptable. Numerous communities in South Carolina have used sharpshooting over the years. I won't go through the entire list. I provided you the entire list, but there are quite a few. Mr. Ruth went through all of the requirements that are necessary in order to obtain a permit. So what it comes down to is without intervention, our deer population is going to continue growing. We have no natural predators. The deer behavior is changing drastically. They are walking into garages. They're approaching people. And they're not acting like wild deer anymore. They have become extremely accustomed to human people. I don't want to repeat anything that's already been stated, so forgive me. But in summary, we are experiencing increasing negative economic impact and hazards presented by the deer. We have human-deer interactions with accidents, significant browse damage, and we have property damage. We have no other alternatives except to pursue the culling of deer. We are not looking to exterminate all of the deer. We are looking for a happy balance. So we are respectfully requesting that you approve the amendment to the City Code, Section 22.4, to allow the use of firearms in order to reduce our deer herd population, and perhaps any other community that has a similar issue, because it can be devastating to not only property values, but if property values start going down, your tax base will also start going down. And so it's an issue that we really would like you to help us with. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz, can I ask you, and I appreciate I allowed you more time because there's a lot of questions that we have.
Thank you.
The management plan that Mr. Ruth spoke of, has the property owners already approached doing a management plan or researched?
The management plan was an older requirement. They're no longer required, and so I think that's correct.
Are they no longer, so the management plan isn't even required anymore?
However, what we have done is because we went and talked to some archers, we actually walked the property and found areas that are far away from residents, and that is probably where we would do most of the culling. We will not be doing any culling on undeveloped lots that are between homes, because if you look at a lot of our streets, the there are homes on the other side. Their backyards may abut, and so it's really not a safe area in which to do deer culling if there are homes close by. And so we have many areas. We identified probably about 7 or 8 that are rather large. They're out in areas where there are no homes. We just built a couple more golf holes. There are no homes there, so we can do the culling there. So we know where we want to do it. We know, we have an idea of who we wish to hire to do the culling.
I assume it's probably one of the 4.
Yes. So,
Ms. Roof, do any of those have a certified wildlife biologist as a part of their team?
To my knowledge, all but the one do.
Okay.
we are considering a
So it's not
certified
hard
biologist.
to get one then with that. So it would not be difficult to get someone in South Carolina who has a certified wildlife biologist.
That's, Mr. Mayor, that's an artifact of the original guidelines. Right? We started out with those 4, we got about 4 this time.
I just made my notes wrong because I wrote that a management plan was required and you specified that was a third party, that y'all guys didn't do it. So is that not the case?
That was the original guidelines, and they were amended several years ago at the request of the communities because of the expense.
Ms. Schultz, I'm just going to tell you, and I realize we have a room full of people, so please forgive me, but I don't have heartburn with culling. What I have heartburn with is that we give up complete control. So you said it wouldn't be on a vacant lot between 2 houses, but once we pass this, we have no way of saying it will or won't. And so I'm just, I feel like Section D, as we have written it, does not give the city a say in we're just kind of turning it over, and that's my biggest concern. I have no doubt that the POA would do the right thing on this, but it does affect the city. So that's why I'm struggling with right now the way it's currently written.
How can we,
I don't know what we're going to do tonight with it, but I mean, that's just to let you know where I'm at on this. So, of course, it's a council decision, not just one person. So, thank you. You've answered all my questions. Anyone else? We appreciate the information you supply us. Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
My name is Jackie Hardy. I live at 361 Live Oak, which is in Woodside, and my husband and I only bought in about 3 months ago, so we weren't aware of any of this until next door recently. And I've spent the entire day researching it because I wanted to come out and at least make an opinion heard. I don't have anything against the idea of a deer cull in general. If the deer were sick, the deer were not having enough to eat, things like that, I get it. We don't want sad deer. Our deer are happy, healthy, and a little chubby, at least the ones that live by my house. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old who think they're the greatest thing ever, and I know that my neighbors, not the direct next door because I've got an empty lot there, but in general do feed the deer, which is why they love people. The deer are not scared of us because we're giving them treats. If I were giving a wild dog treats, it would come and hang out at my house too. So I don't have a problem with the deer not being scared of us, because that just doesn't make any sense. But the wording and the way you guys want to do it, or whoever came up with the wording, does bother me, because while Woodside, they are very concerned with lawsuits. Everything we read, everything we do, they have checked all the boxes. They're making sure it's safe so that nobody sues them. But I can't guarantee that all the rest of the communities would have that look on it or that take on it. And with 2 small kids, I don't want to have to worry that they're going to a sleepover somewhere on the other side of Aiken and having issues that I didn't even know the community had. Because that's just, it's not my little happy bubble. So the fact that there's no permit or license for sharpshooters, and yet we keep using the term sharpshooter, kind of bothers me because they don't really exist. I'm from a cop family. I know that there are such things as sharpshooters, but they're tested, they're qualified, they have to go through lots of stuff, and out here there's nothing. There's no license, no permit, and the permit required to get this, at least according to the 6 different agencies I spoke to today, is a $24.50 permit. You can do it completely online. You get 2 chances to try it before you actually have to pay for the permit. And there's nothing there that says you can fire a weapon or you have any accuracy. I've fired a shotgun once in my life because my husband's a gun collector. It hurt my shoulder very badly, and I am never going to do that again. But I could technically be qualified and call myself a sharpshooter and go into one of these communities and do whatever I'd like, not having an idea. And without it being in the ordinance that you shouldn't do that, you have to have some type of qualification that you guys are controlling as the people taking care of us. It just seems a little wonky to me. Also, if we let the deer be first, what's next? What's a nuisance animal? The deer, yes, there have been 25 accidents in Woodside according to their information in the past 3 years. I completely believe that because in our latest membership newsletter, which I'm sure they can confirm, they did a speed test, and with one of our stop signs, people were going through there at 65 miles an hour in a residential area. They're just flying. I cannot take my kids walking around in certain streets because I know better than to take them for walks because they'll get hit by a car. Not everybody can even see that well with the speeds they're going. So the deer, they're not attacking us. We're kind of flying around and oops, there was a deer and I didn't see it kind of thing. So at least in Woodside, I feel like maybe a lot of those car accidents could be the people's fault more than the deer's fault. I know that on occasion I have gone a little over the 30 miles per hour because I was running late to get my kid to school and the pink slip scares him. But never very fast because I do have 2 kids in the car and that would freak me out too. But again, the wording, it's just too do whatever you want. The state, while they haven't had problems in the past, they basically wash their hands of it. It's okay, you have your license, you did your online course, great, POA's in charge. And if you have a POA like Woodside that is going to do a good job and make sure people are safe, that's great. But if you have another POA that isn't going to make sure people are safe, you guys have no control. The people that live in the subdivision have no control, and the poor parents who have to send our kids to go to sleepovers in these other areas have no idea it's happening. And my kids, at least, the 6-year-old, is currently petrified of bears. So he's not exactly dying to sleep in the tent outside, but his dad is dying to put him in a tent outside to have campouts in their backyard.
All right.
So that's what I'm worried about, just my little peanuts. Not the deer, not everybody else, but I'm worried about my cute little 3-year-old and my little 6-year-old that will find a way to get hurt because it's what they do.
Well said, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing with us tonight. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I'm Robert Nicholson. I live at 723 West Pleasant Colony Drive in Woodside. I've got a few facts for you that I pulled off the internet, and I think a national and a statewide perspective, and then I'll talk just a little bit about the Woodside problem. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you okay. Thank you.
U.S. deer population, 33.5 million deer. That's a 2017 figure I got from deerfriendly.com. The South Carolina deer population from the same source, 2016, 725,000 deer. Now, Mr. Ruth mentioned the deer harvest in South Carolina, and I got this figure from the DNR website. 195,000 deer were taken in the year 2018. The record in 2002, 320,000. We have a lot of deer, and the state is trying to control the population. Now, what's happened to the population of the United States? It's been covered. We've created a vast deer resource with golf courses. And we've removed the natural predators. And with good deer nutrition, again, this is from the website, the deer population can more than double in 1 year. And where hunting is not allowed, the deer live in a totally predator-free environment. That's Woodside perfectly described. So what damage is associated with the deer nationally, with the overpopulation? More than 1 million vehicle deer collisions each year, with over 100 human deaths. Okay, and I can testify to an incident I had one night, 7 o'clock in the winter, down Steeplechase Drive at 30 miles an hour. It's pitch black in there, as you know. There are very few street lights. Out of the corner of my eye, here comes a deer at a full run. I had just enough time to touch the brake, and the deer barely cleared in front of my truck, or he was through the windshield. Okay, that's going to happen out there. What are the solutions to the deer overpopulation? Again, this is from deerfriendly.com. They've looked at all of them. The only solution is for deer entrapped in a community like Woodside is sharpshooting. Now, it goes on to say that no serious deer overpopulation problem can be possible until local, state, and federal government agencies assume responsibility to implement a solution, and quite a few of them have. And I've got one example. You can look it up yourself. It's a Fairfax County in Virginia. They have a very informative website. It's very comprehensive in how they do it. Basically, they implement the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fishery Guidelines, which is equivalent to our DNR. Now, they've had a program, they established it, and it has been running since January 1998 in Fairfax County. Where's Fairfax County? It's a major county in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, a huge, prosperous county. Their criteria: a healthy ecosystem can support 15 to 20 deer per square mile without damage to the environment. But the deer density at many Fairfax County sites was 40 to 100 deer per square mile. So they established this program to protect the safety and health hazards in the community and to manage the deer population responsibly. Now, what do? They use archery and sharpshooting by qualified hunters and specially trained police officers to harvest the deer on public and private land. And this goes on throughout the year. Now, what's the estimated deer density in Woodside? Keeping in mind 15 to 20 is a reasonable amount. We counted 600 deer over a year ago, and these deer are eating everything in sight. How many do you think we have out there now? We're going to do another count. We have 4.7 acres, 4.7 square miles, which is 3,000 acres. So if you use the number 5 and you divide it into 600, we have 120 deer per square mile. 120. This is a serious overpopulation. Our recommendation is to go ahead and modify the city ordinance, if you will, but we have to get on with this. We're the only area who's reporting a problem. It doesn't really involve the rest of the city right now, but we need relief. What's the population going to be next year, 1,000? We have a serious problem. We need some action, please. We're asking.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Ruth. Good evening.
My name is Michael Stern. I live in Woodside. I live at 111 Poplar Hill Court. My question really, unfortunately, was to be directed to you, but I want to find out from DNR what are the liabilities and what are the insurance requirements if this ordinance goes through, if this modification goes through. To me, you need to specify within the change to the, if you're going to change the ordinance, who's got the liability? Is it going to be the POA? Is it going to be you, the town council? I don't want to be part of a lawsuit if something happens. Yes, the DNR has said they've been doing this for 20 years, they've had no problems. That doesn't mean there's not going to be problems down the road. Woodside is a very densely populated in certain areas. I'm not concerned about where the POA has said very clearly they're going to try to stay away from homes. That's not my concern. My concern is here with you guys. If Woodside, as so many people have said, they're so very careful what they do things very well. What about the other communities within the city of Aiken that may not be as careful as Woodside is? I think that is something that you folks on this council, before you adopt this change to the code, need to recognize. I think insurance is a huge issue. Is it going to be Woodside's responsibility to have insurance? Is it going to be the sharpshooter, if he or she is really a sharpshooter? Mm-hmm. Who's going to have that? Who's going to have that responsibility? And what is the responsibility of the council in the same vein as far as the liability is concerned? And carrying the insurance, or ensuring that insurance is carried adequately. Again, that should be, in my opinion, that should be part of your ordinance before you adopt it. Because right now, probably Woodside would do it correctly, but maybe XYZ would not, or ABC would not. That I don't think you can take, or I am suggesting you should not take that chance in changing the ordinance to allow it across the city. And the other question I had was, must the POA notify the city prior to applying for a DNR permit? It seems to me that, as some gentleman said earlier, you're really washing your hands of the whole process if you change the ordinance to allow the discharge of firearms within the city. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Stern.
Hopefully you'll...
Well, and I appreciate it, and thank you for staying there in time. Mr. Waltz asked the very question that you did about insurance, and DNR does not assure it, so you're right. I think that is something that needs to be addressed as well. It's a very valid point on that, and it does have to be considered citywide, so your points are...
As well as liability.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Paper. Good evening.
Thank you. My name's Robert Osteen. I live in Woodside Plantation for 30 years. As y'all can tell, that the number of votes that the POA disclosed is not indicative of the people in Woodside. It's indicative of the number of votes. The POA has been asked numerous times to disclose to a number of us the exact number of votes in Woodside, and they will not do that. That says confidential information, but that's not a city issue. That's a Woodside issue, and we'll address that later. The city firearms ordinance was put in place for a reason. That's for the safety of our citizens. The deer are no more of a problem in Woodside than anywhere else in the county. The few deer car incidents that have happened in Woodside would be greatly reduced if people would abide by the speed limit. Our home is located on the side of Woodside Plantation Drive, so we see the traffic flow through there a lot. And mark my word, if the people would slow down and pay attention, the number of incidents.
I'm sorry. We're going to respect Mr. Osteen's right to speak to council, please.
The number of incidents would be reduced. Okay, and as we've said before, a change in the ordinance affects everyone in the city, not just in Woodside. Keep in mind that Woodside borders a lot of neighborhoods. All the sides of Woodside border some sort of neighborhood or Chucker Creek Elementary School. Many subdivisions in the city of Aiken border schools, so we need to keep that in mind also. The distance that these rifles can shoot are measured in miles, not feet. That's something we need to really consider. These are high-powered rifles. These are not pistols. The deer were here first. We need to learn to live with them, not to kill them. The deer are healthy. They're not overpopulated. They're not a hazard to the people. Yeah, they eat a few of our plants, but so do the rabbits also. A deer cull may be painted as a thinning of the herd, but let's face it, it's a mass murder. It's a mass murder of deer. What you do, and this came through Aiken Department of Public Safety and through DNR, and it's been disclosed tonight that they herd the deer up in a certain area and they bait it. Then they bring out the sharpshooters to shoot the deer. Okay, that's what we saw in the concentration camps in Germany in World War II. I say it again.
No,
we've seen it before.
Oh, okay.
So it's very similar to a mass murder, and that's what it is. It's not a gentle cull or anything, or a gentle shot. It is a mass murder. Okay, Aiken is a Southern living community, and Woodside is a designated Southern living community. As a resident of Woodside and a resident of the city of Aiken, I'm pretty proud of that. I think we've done a very good job. I don't think a bloody mass murder of deer in our neighborhoods is a pretty picture to associate with any of our neighborhoods or with the city of Aiken. Do we really want to teach our kids that the way to solve some of the problems is to kill? I don't think so. We have enough problems in the city of Aiken with firearms being shot. Please leave the ordinance as it is.
All right.
For the safety of the citizens of Aiken.
Thank you, Mr. Osteen.
Thank you.
This way has been trying.
Anyone over? I know, I was just playing with Corey. Corey, come on up. Good evening.
Thank you. And this is my first council meeting, so I'm very humbled.
You're doing great.
And I'm probably going to forget half of the things that I want to say, but I do not live in Woodside. I'm just your ordinary. I do not live in Woodside. I'm just your average, ordinary Aiken citizen that caught on to this via Facebook because I'm 50 and that's what I do. And as much as I appreciate, and it sounds quaint and contrite, these people that live in Woodside, this is their forever home, their investment. This is their life. We completely understand that there is a lot of loss with landscape and things like that. However, we do not live on Hilton Head Highland. These deer aren't reproducing and they have nowhere to go. Okay, so that being said, I don't think we can classify ourselves as the same as being on an island. We are Aiken, and that's a thing, just like he said, something to be proud of. Bringing in sharpshooters, I don't like that word, but isn't very Aiken-ish. That isn't what Aiken does. I've been here since 1996. I'm not an original Aikenite, but I've become Southerner, and I've become an Aikenite. And my biggest concern, granted has always been said, was this particular ordinance is no longer about Woodside. It's no longer about deer. It's about the city of Aiken. And the regular citizens of Aiken have got a voice, and our vote is equal to any vote that's in Woodside. And that being said, I just want to say we appreciate the loss. And I'm sorry for the loss that Woodside is having. However, a lot of Aiken people don't appreciate that. We don't want to see sharpshooters come in over a loss of landscaping when you can change your landscaping. The car issues with them, I think, has been said. And going slower, watching out, no, it's not going to cure everything. But 25 cars in 3 years is something you're going to have to deal with when you have a habitat with deer in your neighborhoods. I look into Woodside as someplace I'll never be. I think of them as they have money. And this, I'm not saying that in a bad way. What I'm saying is, with this particular ordinance that they're asking for, as much as we understand they want to get rid of some of these deer, a lot of the other HOAs, POAs in Aiken cannot afford what they can afford. They can afford the best of the best. I have full confidence that they would hire the absolute best. They would hire, and it would probably go seamlessly. However, if we continue with this particular ordinance that you want to go down, there's going to be neighborhoods that cannot afford exactly what they've been able to do. And it may not go as seamlessly if, say, Sandstone wants to get rid of their armadillos. If I can go get a permit for a silencer, which would probably cost a lot of money, but if I could, they could hire me. I'm not going to do that. But at the same time, I just really wish you would reconsider how this is wrote. My heart is with Woodside. I understand their problems because this is their life. This is their home. They want to protect it. They've invested lots of their time and their money and their efforts and their work over the years. We understand that. However, the way this is wrote, it can't be for the city of Aiken. It cannot be. Thanks.
Corey, well done. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Pink. Good evening.
Mr. Mayor, Council, thank you for hearing all of us. I have one thing to add. One night, first of all, my name is Fran Warner, and I live at 255 Sterling Grove Circle, Woodside. One night at 10 o'clock, my dog needed to go outside. Now, when I say I live at 255 Sterling Grove Circle, we have a circle in front of our house with an island there. I'm walking the dog, minding my own business, and all of a sudden a herd of deer come out of that island and almost ran over me and my dog. I'm not driving a car 30 mile an hour, 15 mile an hour, or 45 mile an hour. I'm walking, and those deer came at us. It scared me terribly. That's really all I have to say. We need this passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Warner. Okay. Anybody have anything to say that we haven't heard already at this point?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Good evening, Mr.
Good.
Mayor.
Good evening.
Council. My name's Michael Day. I live at 343 Forest Pines Road in Aiken. One of the things that hasn't come up this evening, to your point, is the fact that so many of us, to control deer on our property, have to do things that are not healthy for the deer. And I can see, after 19 years, a deterioration in the deer. They're not healthy. They're not healthy. I put tick spray on my lawn because my granddaughter comes down here from Massachusetts And in 1 week, we're taking a tick off the fur. That's not good. We spray for mosquitoes. All of that goes on my vegetation. And the deer are eating all my vegetation. I put the harshest chemicals on my plants because I read the ingredients. Do not use with pets. But I'm controlling diseases on my plants. But the deer, they're eating all these chemicals. Eating all these chemicals. So I put netting on. So I protect the deer, but take care of my shrubs. The bucks come into the property, they take their antlers, lift up the nets, and eat my vegetation. It's not good for the deer. So I think if you want to hear something different tonight, think about all the chemicals we're putting on our yard. Think about all the chemicals we're putting on our shrubs. And what is that doing to the deer population and their health? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Day. Couple more. I have two more hands up, so I'm going to have here first, and then I'll ask you next. Good evening.
Hi. My name is Pamela White, and I live in Woodside. I'm not like anyone else in Woodside from the standpoint of, after it rains, I'm out in the driveway saving the worms. I am the biggest deer lover in this room. I'm one of the people that have been feeding the deer from the moment we moved here almost 10 years ago. They're dying. I can tell you what this gentleman just said. In the last probably 3 years, I've noticed a huge change. The females that normally would produce maybe 3 in the fall, they're not producing. But the others are, so there's a constant flow of new little ones around. They're not getting enough food, and they're not getting the right food. And anyone who wants to challenge me on this, just do your research. Culling has been around forever. And I love the deer. But I want the deer to be healthy. And right now, if you spend the amount of time that I have over the last 9 years feeding them, you will know they're starving. And at what point are we being selfish by saying, first of all, whoever said mass murder and referenced...
Pam.
I'm sorry. Mayor, whoever said mass murder and reference that was wrong. There are a lot of species that will cull their own. The deer are not capable of culling their own, and right now, they're starving. So if you are an animal lover, you will understand that they are suffering. They're really suffering. That's what I really want to say.
Thank you. One more. Gentleman in the back. Good evening.
Mayor. My name's Charlie Spainhour, and I probably am the oldest resident of Woodside in the room, not age-wise, but tenure-wise. There were 5 of us moved in the same week, the first time anybody lived in Woodside. We've talked all around it tonight. The vote, I think there is a real question about whether or not the majority of the residents of Woodside want to call the deer. It shouldn't be difficult to get the vote broken down by residents, separate that from the other votes, and determine what the majority of residents really want. And I think there's a real question that needs to be addressed before this vote goes any further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All right. We're going to close public comment. Comments from council.
I'd like to add something. Mayor Osmond, thank you for all the comments and everybody that came up and took time out tonight to discuss this issue. I think people brought up very good points. I think the insurance point that Councilman Woltz brought up and others brought up, I think that relieving all authority to any organization or third party or whatever the case may be does open things up to where we have no control. I think that's a very valid point. I think if we move forward with this amendment, I think the wording needs to be reconsidered. And I think as council, we need to spend more time on the wording of this amendment and tighten it up and add more stipulations, so we truly are addressing the concerns of the community that have an issue with moving forward with this ordinance, and the concern of the people that truly feel there is an issue with the deer in Woodside or any other neighborhood or whatever the case may be. And so that's where I'd like to leave it. I'd like to recommend that we take this ordinance back to the drawing board and make it as strong as it should be. And if I'm not mistaken, obviously, everybody knows what needs to happen in order for that to even be an option. So I just wanted to share that.
I'd just like to say that I'm out in Woodside visiting friends and family, especially family on Magnolia Lake Road, and I see a lot of the deer. I understand that there's too many. I don't have any problem necessarily with the culling. My biggest problem is this is not right for the entire city. I don't think that the majority of the people in other areas want it. And if we're going to pass it, if being inclusive of everyone, then the best suggestion is to put it on a ballot and let them decide. That's it.
Go ahead, you go first.
Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for their emails and their phone calls and text messages, and it's been fairly remarkable. In my little unscientific poll, it's 50-50. And I've gotten on both sides of this, and congratulations. I want to congratulate you on your passion over this, both sides. I wish everybody would be passionate about things they believe in and come to us and tell us how they feel. This has been a learning experience. I tried to keep an open mind to this whole thing so that we could learn, and the Deer Man helped a lot in the sense of there's some things I'd learned from that process, and I agree with Andrea that we need to readdress the Part D of the amendment if we're going to do anything at all going forward.
You know, there comes a time when you run for re-election when you're called upon to make a tough decision, and I think that's where we're at tonight. We have a very large, very important segment of our community that's asking for our help. Mr. Ruth clearly said our responsibility is to enable that community to deal with the problem in that community. The issue about it affecting other communities, I think he addressed. Most of those animals are not, he's never issued a permit for anything other than culling deer. So to say that it's a problem that is going to affect the rest of the city just doesn't make sense to me. Our responsibility is to enable the people of Woodside to deal with their problem. And there's a lot of problems within Woodside. I hear it from you. There's a lot of differences of opinion. There's challenges to the legitimacy of the vote. There are some issues that need to be resolved in Woodside. But our job is to enable you to deal with your problem. And I think that we should at least take it to second reading, and hopefully people can give it some more thought and we can get some more input. But I certainly would support the change. it's not a case of allowing people to take a gun and indiscriminately shoot a deer anywhere. It's a very structured process, very structured. And I think we were all very impressed with Mr. Ruth. And DNR has laid out some very specific rules for that. So I'll support taking the second reading, and I hope the rest of the council will do so as well.
Well, my only comment is this is definitely a city issue. We're not dealing with just Woodside. I contacted our council, said, could we cut out just one spot? And was told, no, we can't. And so it is a citywide issue. Mr. Ruth actually took me from thinking it was a very structured thing to saying, we turn it over to them to do it. And that gave me heartburn, because if we're just going to turn it over, you've got a permit now, you handle it. I'm concerned about that. It doesn't matter what we vote tonight, or whenever this comes up to vote. We're not going to make everybody happy. Half people in this room are going to be upset, half of them going to be mad, or happy. So it doesn't matter. This is a tough decision for us, but we've got to look at what's best for the whole community. And we've never allowed shooting in this community, and the question is, are we going to allow it now?
Good. All right. No further comments? Let me just add to it. I want to commend actually Mr. DeCivio. So I know he's going to be shocked I said that. I think his point was spot on though. Where we're at right now, and we were talking earlier, and I would say, Mr. Waltz, I agree. As Mr. Ruth spoke, the more he spoke about it, and he was super nice to be here, and I certainly appreciate that. But I realize that this thing is really just out of our control completely, the way it's written now. I cannot support Section D. I might would be willing. In fact, I'm willing to move it forward. But I can tell you, I wouldn't see a second reading unless there was some provisions in this that gave many more accountabilities, the insurance. I don't know, and I'll talk to staff. But if there's not a certified wildlife biologist on the team doing it, I certainly don't want it in the city of Aiken. That seems at a minimal. It almost seems like everything that I agreed with and I thought was in the process, he said, well, that's how it was initially, but we took that out. And that it kind of shocked me, quite honestly, because I had assumed that was in there. I think I'll say Mr. Stern, I believe, brought the issue up of the insurance and the liability, and that's something that we as a governing body have to know of. We can't just leave that up to hopefully they have it. And I do want to say, Corey Harper, who I've known a long time, he did a great job presenting to us. Thank you. That was the quietest I've ever heard you in 10 years, but we appreciate your input. I will, what I'm going to
Mr. Mayor, before we move forward, question for our attorney. Can we overwrite part of the state's thing? Like, can we make requirements that the state doesn't make?
Well, it's something that I want to look into. The process that DNR follows is mandated by the state code. And city does not have the, my initial thought is the city may not have the ability to modify what the state law says about the process. But I would be happy to investigate this before second reading and get a memo back to City Council to give you my better thoughts once I've had a chance to look at it.
So if we don't, in the event that you can't modify that,
right,
can you add additional stipulations at the local municipal level?
Well, I'm hearing an addition of some type of insurance requirement. I'm hearing the wildlife biologist being certified as part of the team. And I'm going to look into that and see. I'll talk to Mr. Ruth, see what his concerns might be. He's not going to be concerned with enforcing the city code. And so he wouldn't be the one to say, well, if you don't have insurance, you can't do this in the city of Aiken. But if we mandate in the city code that they have to provide us with proof of that insurance, that would probably give you the assurances that you're looking for. I just need to make sure we can do that.
Mr. Mayor, then I would suggest that we table this until we can get an answer and know where we can go with this.
Okay, there's a motion to table.
Why table it? Well, let's just take it to second reading. If you don't like it in 2 weeks, it's dead. I mean, table it does nothing. We still have to pass it in 2 ordinances.
I would agree.
It has to pass 2 readings, so there's
Okay, that's fine with me.
no guarantee. I mean, if you don't like it, I mean, Mr. Ruth said the insurance is up to Woodside. This whole thing is up to Woodside. They're responsible for everything that's done if they decide to cull the deer. That's what Mr. Ruth made very clear.
I think this decision before us tonight is up to us, though. I mean,
Only decision to us is whether or not we enable them to deal with their problem. If we don't, if we want to start interfering with homeowners association,
The decision tonight is a city decision. It's not a Woodside
I don't
decision.
disagree with having first reading as an introductory, but I don't want to see it till second reading until I'd probably call, quite frankly, some of the folks who gave input tonight and put a group together to help give input on it, to be quite honest. So
'Cause I thought
I would support moving it forward, but I wouldn't vote for a second until we have something that answered a lot of the comments.
that's fine. These folks deserve an end to the process, an end to a beginning, and
But I
Move your request for a table, Mr. Waltz?
I'm going to let Ms.
No,
Biggs.
go ahead.
No, you go
Because I
ahead.
agree with you. Simply because we're here tonight to decide if we need to amend this for the entire city. That's what I'm not in favor of. I don't mind doing something for Woodside so they can control their population, but I don't think it's right for us to amend it for the entire city. Is there any way we can do it without that?
Well, as Mr. Waltz alluded to, when you pass a law for the Aiken City Code, you've got to make sure that it passes constitutional muster. We got this book tonight.
I got it.
Constitution says that the laws that the city pass should equally protect all of the city's citizens. So you can't make a special law for one particular part of town that doesn't apply to the rest of town.
And I want to reiterate what Councilman Duar said. I agree with you 100%. But I think what Mayor Osmond has mentioned is taking it one step further to just do, because everybody does deserve a response, yay or nay or whatever. And so the fact that we can bring both of these camps and our group and make that reading, that amendment, that verbiage better, tighter, safer for the entire community is something I think that we owe to the community. And like Councilman Duar said, if it dies in the second reading, it dies in the second reading, but at least it's going to give us a step forward to work on making it better and addressing everybody's concern.
I need to address, no?
I'll drive.
Okay. All right, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of moving forward with the amendments to Section 22-4, discharging firearms or other weapons in the city of Aiken on the introductory reading, please raise your hand. So I see Councilwoman Gregory, the mayor, Councilman Duar, Councilman Girardeau, vote positive. Those opposed, Councilman Waltz, and Councilwoman Diggs. Okay, thank you. The motion carries forward. I will just say that this will not be up for second reading until there are some serious amendments to this, and a lot of folks in this room have been.
And remind everybody, that doesn't mean it's going to pass, even at that. We'll still talk about it.
I'll give you a point of order. Yes, sir.
Yes, point of order. So on the second reading, it'll be no change in this amendment. Because it wouldn't be a second reading if there
So
was
what we'd have is Mr. DeCibio, is this, probably a group which I hope you'd be willing to serve on, would be put together to make amendments. So a lot of the comments that were made tonight. So it would be an amendment to be brought forward at second reading for this. So it would be brought forward as this, and before we voted, it would be amended with that passage of how whatever as a group is recommended to it. And there would be another public hearing on that event.
Okay, so that would be a first reading of
No, sir, it would be the same one. It would be amended, but there would be another public hearing at that time also. So
that will become the first reading?
that would be second reading. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And the edits.
we frequently do this when we need more information. We want to keep the process going. So hopefully between now and whenever the second reading is scheduled, we'll get the additional information that we need, that some of us need, and we'll be able to bring it back to the community.
Yes, sir. But there would certainly be a public hearing on that. City of Aiken actually does something very unusual. Most government bodies don't give 2 public hearings to an issue when they only have 2 votes. And I'm glad we do, because it gives extra input, and I find we're better for that. So thank you. We need to get down our agenda. And appreciate you being here. Thanks, everyone, and thank you for the attitude in presenting.
We think this applies to the rest of the city.
Because I have a lot of people already calling me, asking me. I had a person call me.
Oh, I know what that is.
Andrea Gregory made the motion, and Mr. Jaredo made the second.
They want you. They said, okay.
It was approved on first reading. 42.
Okay?
First reading as written.
Right for the whole city. You will have people that
Well, then it's going to have to get
That's all I'm
rejected.
saying.
Then it's
You know,
going to
I
get
don't
rejected.
have no problem with them allowing them to control their population. But everybody from
Thank you, I appreciate it.
and we got to worry about safety for the entire city. Okay? That's my thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, it is with deer.
Well, it is, and like I said, I don't have any problem with the deer color.
Unless he's not.
But it's
Unless he'll be here next time.
it's making this thing inclusive.
Eileen, well, you can call me later. I need to get, I got the rest of the agenda to go through.
We can't.
Please call me, though. Thank you.
The majority
All right.
Well, that's bending them down.
Yeah, we got a normal crowd.
Nice call.
It's home.
It's too
Don't
soon.
even sit up front. I mean, I still think sitting in the back.
All right, we're going to, my mom just got admitted to the hospital, so we're going to go fast. Okay. Old business, approval of appointments and discussions to appointees of various city boards, commissions, and committees. I will look to our city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have the following, the mayor recommends reappointing Royal Robbins to the General Aviation Commission. Councilman Jaredo recommends the reappointment of Tina McCarthy to the Accommodations Tax Committee. And Councilwoman Price has recommended the reappointment of James Gallman to the Housing Authority, John Wallace to the Recreation Commission, and Leroy Myrick to the Community Development Committee. And she has also recommended the appointment of Chad Ingram to the Equine Committee.
Good.
And that you have these appointments before you for consideration tonight.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Is there a motion to accept these
I
nominations?
so move.
Thank you, Councilwoman Diggs. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gregory. All those in favor of the appointments, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Thank you.
And we do have, I know Councilwoman Price is absent, however, she did email the city clerk, the mayor, and myself recommending the appointment or the nomination for consideration of Leela Wolf for the Equine Committee. And council was handed Ms. Wolf's credentials.
Okay. And I have 2 reappointments, Ricky Brown to the Recreation Commission and Gary Yount to the Community Development Commission, and also have 2 appointments to the Equine Commission, Carrie Fromer and Sarah Wilderson.
Okay. It's well done. Okay, any other appointments for consideration? All right, hearing none, we'll consider those at our next meeting. Moving down to item number 2. This is a second reading and public hearing of an ordinance authorizing the financing of the new municipal building on Chesterfield Street as through an installment purchase contract. By title, an ordinance authorizing the city to enter into an installment purchase transaction to finance the costs relating to the acquisition and equipping of a new city hall facility, authorizing the execution and delivery of various documents relating to such installment purchase transaction, including the base lease agreement and the installment purchase and use agreement, approving the use of certain money of the city, approving the issuance of bonds by the Aiken Public Facilities Corporation, delegating authority to the mayor and city manager to effect such transactions and determine certain matters, declaring the intent of the city to reimburse itself from tax-exempt bond proceeds and other matters related thereto. Is there a motion?
I so move.
Councilwoman Diggs, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gregory. Comments from staff?
Thank you. At our last meeting, we passed a resolution authorizing the purchase of 107 Chesterfield Street South for consolidation of city operations, and a portion of this cost, which we estimate not to exceed $7.5 million, will need to be borrowed. And similar to how we did the public safety building, this will allow us to make annual installment payments subject to an annual appropriation by City Council. This ordinance authorizes that project. It authorizes a purchase and sale agreement and allows for collaboration between the city and our public facilities corporation. It allows for an installment purchase and use agreement, a base lease agreement, and a trust agreement, along with a reimbursement declaration. And as I said earlier, this is the method we use for the public safety building project. It would not affect any general obligation bonding capacity. Right now, we have no general obligation debt, and we have this before you at second reading this evening.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Beatenbaugh. Any comments from the audience? Comments from council?
Mr. Mayor, I'm a little problem with this because we haven't got a final plan on what we're going to do, know exactly what our final number's going to be. I support doing it, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But we're putting up money, we're saying we're going to spend it, and I don't know what the plan is. I don't know how much our final total is. I don't know what we're going to add, what we're going to delete. I mean, it just seems like, let's put the money up and we'll figure it out later.
We had a total.
Well, we would not release this until the very end of the project. This kind of allows us to get the process started, and that is a very fair and valid point. As we did last time, the way the process worked is we instituted a purchase and sale resolution, and then we had this ordinance in mid-year 2017, and then we came back. That was before you were on council, and then you may remember last fall we issued an RFP for the bonding, or for the the financing of the project, where we financed the public safety building, and then had first and second reading for the actual dollar amount, and then we approved that, and then had the real estate closing, I believe, in January of 2019.
Okay.
That is the same sort of timeline.
You said the important thing, we won't release anything until we agree on it all. So.
Absolutely. That is correct, because we still have to submit proposals to lending institutions, get bids in, and by that time we'll have a better sense of, we'll know, frankly, what the dollar amount is that we need. We do know we have cash on hand of about a little over $6 million between cash on hand and sale of real estate, which, but that is a very good point, and I'm glad I was able to clarify that on the record.
I am too.
Very good. Good question. Any other comments from council?
Only to recognize that the total cost of the building is going to be about $18 million when you include financing.
Very good. All those in favor of second reading and public hearing of an ordinance authorizing the financing of the new municipal building, please raise your hand. And that's everyone except Councilman Dewar. All those opposed? Councilman Dewar, thank you.
Raise my hand.
Motion passes. Item number 3, this is a second reading and public hearing of an ordinance to amend the city budget for fiscal year 2019-20 by title, an ordinance amending the budget of the city of Aiken for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2019 and ending June 30th, 2020. Is there a motion?
So moved, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Councilman DeWar. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Councilwoman Diggs. Comments from staff?
Thank you. We did discuss this at the work session last meeting, as well as have first reading. And as we have most years, we have unspent money, unspent funds, primarily due to several things. One is the certain items that are budgeted for in the prior fiscal year were not able to be purchased due to just waiting to receive items from the vendor. We have unexpected revenues, employment vacancy leads to money, and unspent money or unexpected money. And we had over $2 million in unspent funds because of increased revenue and insurance collections and salary underruns, and the inability to receive certain goods prior to the end of last fiscal year. We had some discussion. I think one thing staff was an important takeaway is I think we will work harder and better to, I think, have better revenue estimates so council can make good budgeting decisions. One of the things, but we did talk about that typically we averaged a little over $500,000 in unspent funds in prior fiscal years. There were several pieces of information that council asked for at the last meeting, and I believe we endeavored to include all that in the packet. One was the cost of a leak crew, which would come out of the water and sewer funds, which is approximately $260,000, which includes the workers' benefits and equipment. Plus, council asked for a spreadsheet or a listing of revenues, budgeted revenues, and actual received revenues. And then we added a column that highlights the over, in parentheses, or under revenues. So we provided that. We have this before you. A lot of the money that we are requesting be allocated into the fiscal year 1920 budget includes, I think, council goals, including money for economic development. This would give us an additional $525,000 added to economic development. We are also adding an additional $50,000 for facade grants. As you know, our downtown business district expanded, so in most years we've been funding facade grants at about $20,000 to $25,000. Here we are tripling that to $75,000. We're also adding $300,000 to building depreciation, as well as money for the municipal building consolidation as part of that goal of council to try to minimize the amount of debt that might be accrued as part of this municipal building consolidation. So we have before you a second reading of an ordinance amending the budget to allocate the unspent funds from fiscal year 18-19 to budget them for into fiscal year 19-20.
Thank you, Mr. Beedenbaugh. Any comments from the audience? Comments from council?
As written, does this include the water team?
It does not, no. We dedicated all of the budget in water and almost all the budget to system depreciation. One of the things we are trying to get fully staffed with our water team, and I think we're close to getting, we were short a team. So we've had difficulty, as we commented in the last work session, with those entry-level positions, finding workers. It's not just unique to engineering and utilities, but we did not, but certainly council is within your prerogative. This is certainly in the form of a recommendation.
Well, if I'm the only one that thinks it's a good idea, we'll let it go.
Or any other comments? All those in favor on the second reading and public hearing of an ordinance to amend the city budget for the fiscal year 19-20, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Thank you. Moving down to that portion of our agenda, new
Mr. Mayor.
business. Yes.
Mayor, excuse me, I'm going to have to recuse myself on number 1 and number 2 because I either own property adjoining or across the street from both of those.
Very, very good, very good. Ms. Waltz.
It's just not an excuse to go home, really.
That's just a cop-out.
One under new business.
Yeah, 2. Wait, needs 2. No, 2.
Two pins?
There's 2.
Item number 1 under new business is a first reading of an ordinance to annex property at 504 Henry Street and zone it to RS10 residential single family by title and ordinance to annex to the corporate limits of the city of Aiken certain property located at 504 Henry Street and to zone the same residential single family RS10. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilman Jarrett, seconded by Mr. Dewar. Comments from staff?
Briefly, this is pursuant to our water and sewer annexation policy, and the owners requesting annexation to be zoned residential single-family RS10 comes with unanimous recommendation by the Planning Commission, Mr. Mayor and Council.
Thank you very much. Any comments from the audience? Comments from council? All those in favor? And that's unanimous with Mr. Waltz recusing himself. Moving down to number 2 under new business, this is a first reading of an ordinance to rezone properties at 127 and 129 Silver Bluff Road from residential single-family RS8 to limited professional LP by title, an ordinance amending the zoning of real estate owned by CEM Real Estate LLC from residential single-family RS8 to limited professional LP. Is there a motion?
So moved.
All right, Councilwoman Gregory made the motion. Councilman Jarrett made the second. Comments from staff?
Thank you. You have before you rezoning of 2 properties, 127 and 129 Silver Bluff Road, to limited professional to provide more flexible use or consistency with adjacent uses and zonings, and it is consistent with our comprehensive plan. The Planning Commission brings it to you with a unanimous recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Beanbo. Any comments from the audience? Comments from council? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous with Mr. Waltz recusing himself.
Tell him, come on back. He lost. He lost.
Welcome back.
I missed y'all.
Number 3 under new business, this is the first reading of an ordinance to approve a quitclaim deed to Aiken County by title and an ordinance approving a quitclaim deed to Aiken County. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilman Jarrett. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilwoman Diggs. Comments from staff?
Yes. The property at 736 Richland Avenue West has been noted in tax records and mapping records as being transferred by the city of Aiken to Aiken County. From 1985 to 2014, it was used by Aiken County government as their county council, primarily as their county council headquarters and chambers. And the property's been vacant since 2014. And Aiken County would like to sell the property to a purchaser who will make use of the property. A review by the council city attorney. Our city attorney believes that a transfer via quitclaim deed is appropriate, as this will expedite the ability to determine the future of the property. So you have before you tonight first reading of an ordinance to approve a quitclaim deed to Aiken County. I do want to note also that between the city and the county, it's been fruitless to have a deed turn up showing that the property is owned or has been transferred to the county.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Benbow. Any comments from the audience? Comments from council? Okay, all those in favor of first reading of an ordinance to approve a quitclaim deed to Aiken County, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Thank you. Continuing on new business item number 4, this is a resolution authorizing the City of Aiken to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the State Transportation Infrastructure Bank for Daugherty Road at Whiskey Road intersection improvement. by title, a resolution authorizing the City of Aiken to enter into an agreement with the South Carolina Transportation Infrastructure Bank. Is there a motion?
I so move.
Thank you, Councilwoman Diggs. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gregory. Comments from staff?
Thank you. The Infrastructure Bank, as you know, funded this project, and we have, the project was delayed in beginning, and it did begin last month. As a result of the fact that it began later than expected, we must provide an amended intergovernmental agreement for this project. The only change is it now says the project starts in August of 2019 with construction to be complete by June of 2020. We do expect the project, though, to finish in March of 2020. That gives us some buffer time in the event there's extreme weather conditions or other unforeseen delays. However, we do believe this project is on track to finish in about 8 months.
Thank you, Mr. Beedenbaugh. Any comments from the audience? Comments, questions from council? Hearing none, all those in favor of a resolution authorizing the City of Aiken to enter into this agreement with the State Transportation Infrastructure Bank, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Thank you. Moving down to that section of our agenda, petitions and requests. Item number 1 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to sign petition for annexation of city property on Branchwater Lane by title, a resolution authorizing the City of Aiken to petition to have real property located at Branchwater Lane annexed to the City of Aiken. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Councilman Girardeau, seconded by Councilman Dewar. Comments from staff?
Thank you. We were approached in the spring by the Oaks Homeowners Association about annexing all the property of Branchwater Lane into the city. They were interested in having a 50% discount on their water and sewer rates, as well as having other city services, and the desire to dedicate Branchwater Lane, which is currently a private street, to the city. The Oaks subdivision consists of 12 properties on Branchwater Lane, a cul-de-sac on the north side of Jim Lakes, and 2 properties were annexed late last year. 8 of the 10 properties are privately owned. 1 is owned by the Oaks Homeowners Association, and the purpose of this resolution is for the city-owned parcel, which contains a sewer lift station. If the city signs this petition, we would have 75% of the property owners signing, which would include the city's property, being a property owner, and then the city can annex the entire area subject to a petition. As it stands now, everyone is interested in coming in except for 1 property owner. Again, the main reason is for the road. The road was built around 1989, 1990 time period. It is in good shape, very good shape. We estimate over 20 years the amount of cost to the city is not going to be abnormally high. It's a well-maintained road, but as part of the annexation, the road would come in, but again, council has expressed a desire with annexation that we minimize enclaves or donut holes, so by signing this, we can bring everyone in.
Good. Any comments from the audience? Comments from council?
Yeah, just thanks for some extraordinary work. It's the first election we've had, and we really appreciate it.
Yes, I do want to say briefly, the mayor, Councilman Girardeau, and a number of our department heads went to a meeting of the community several months ago and explained the benefits of annexation, and this hopefully will be we're almost to the finish line.
Thanks to all of you.
And 1 person is going to be annexed along with this entire group, correct?
That is correct. By signing this, we will bring that property owner in.
Very good.
100%.
That is correct.
We learn from our past mistakes.
Very good. All those in favor of the resolution authorizing the city manager to sign a petition for annexation of city property on Branchwater Lane, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Thank you.
Glad to have them in.
Well, it will be coming back. We're signing the petition, then it will come back for the normal 2-reading annexation.
Oh, okay.
But this sort of gets us to that point.
Number 2 under petitions and requests. This is a request for permission to hang banners in the downtown to promote various events. Mr. Beedenball?
We do have a number of events. I won't go into a lot of detail, but they're from the ADDA, Adams in the Alley, St. John's United Methodist Church is 2 events, and the Pink Ribbonettes.
Very good. Do we have a
So moved,
motion?
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Ward. Thank you, Councilwoman Diggs. Any comments from the audience? Comments from council? All those in favor of granting the permission to hang banners? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Item number 3 is a resolution for committing local match for Municipal Association of South Carolina Hometown Economic Development Grant. By title of resolution, committing the City of Aiken to providing a local match for Municipal Association of South Carolina Hometown Economic Development Grant. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilman Waltz. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Councilwoman Diggs. Comments from staff?
Briefly, as part of one of the requirements for applying for this grant is we must have a resolution from the council authorizing a match for this grant. And Tim O'Brien has put the grant together, and what we would use it for is to help with improvements in our parkways, to help with creating a trail system to include paths and lighting and so forth.
Very good. All right, any comments from the audience? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Any comments from the council?
Yeah, let's do that on Park Avenue. More lights. Great.
They're coming.
Good.
Yeah, the work will start in about a week, I believe, next week, the parkway work, running from Newberry, the intersection of Park and Newberry down to the depot.
Making is over.
Very good. All right, all those in favor of a resolution of committing local match for Municipal Association of South Carolina Hometown Economic Development Grant, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Anything under issues and updates?
I have nothing to report on my end, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Very good. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second. Second.
Councilwoman Gregory, all those in favor, please stand up. We're adjourned.
See you later.
Thanks, man. Thank you.